Hey guys, tonight's story doesn't begin with monsters or haunted houses. It begins with something far more terrifying. A teacup, a corset, and a room full of relatives who would happily bury you alive over a misplaced crumb. You've just woken up in a world where sighing counts as rebellion, stretching is practically a felony, and buttering your toast too enthusiastically might end your social career. The chairs are judging you, the curtains know your secrets, and even the family dog probably has an opinion. And somehow, this is just breakfast. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The sun slinks through the curtains like it's ashamed to be seen, casting long strips of disapproval across the chaise where you accidentally fell asleep reading A Lady's Companion to Decorum, Volume 2, The Sanctity of the Elbow. You do not remember reaching Chapter 5, The Crisis of Posture in Young Wives, but the book lies open beside you like it too has given up. You shift under the scratchy wool throw that smells faintly of lavender, dust, and disappointment. Your ankles are exposed. Already a scandal. You stretch. Not dramatically, not with jazz hands or yodeling, just a small, sensible lift of the arms and an elongated sigh that might be mistaken for mild despair. Unfortunately, this is your first mistake. A woman must never stretch in view of furniture. It implies need. Worse, the sigh was audible, and therefore nearly criminal. Sighing signals exhaustion, possibly boredom, possibly thoughts, all of which are categorically banned before the second tea of the day. You rise, carefully, slowly, like someone aware that each creak of the floorboards beneath your slippers will be reported to your mother by the butler, who never actually leaves the hallway. You smooth your hair. You've slept on it wrong. It's poofed sideways in a manner that suggests rebellion, or at least mild jazz influences. You pin it hastily. You pin it wrong. Someone will notice. Someone always does. Your chemise clings to you slightly. Nothing indecent. Just a little affection from the linen. But this too is a problem. A lady's undergarments must remain as aloof as her gaze. Anything that fits is suspect. You reach for your dressing gown, the pale blue one with the lace that once impressed a distant cousin. She's since married a vicar and become insufferable, but the lace remains lovely. You wrap yourself in it, attempting modesty, but a corner of your collar flops in a vaguely flirtatious way. You adjust. The lace adjusts back. The war begins. There's a knock at the door. Too gentle to be your mother, too precise to be your sister. Likely the maid, who exists solely to witness your lowest moments and report them kindly, which is somehow worse. You call out yes? In a tone that sounds composed, but not too composed. Too much composure in the morning implies arrogance. The door creaks open. Mary enters with a basin of water, 2 towels, and the aura of someone who already knows you forgot to sleep with your gloves on. You wash your face while trying not to splash. Splashes are unruly. Splashes suggest enthusiasm. You pat, dab, press. Anything more is vulgar. The towel is too damp, or too dry, or smells vaguely of starch and regret. It's hard to say. You smile at Mary. She does not smile back. She simply nods and curtsies and leaves with the kind of quiet grace that screams, "I saw your ankles, Eleanor." You dress next. Not alone, of course. Alone dressing is for actresses and women with opinions. No, you have assistants. 4 layers are involved, possibly 5 if the weather is judging you. Your corset is presented like a holy relic, which you accept with the reverence of a martyr. You breathe in. The laces pull tight. You exhale, foolishly, before the last tug, and now your lungs are compressed into a shape resembling an anxious accordion. Your stockings are secured, your chemise tucked, your petticoat fluffed just enough to suggest virtue, but not enough to suggest joy. Then comes the gown, a pale floral thing with sleeves that exist solely to limit arm movement. You step into it as your maid hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like mockery. You want to ask if it's about you. You don't. Asking questions before noon is forward. Downstairs, the drawing room waits like a trap. The curtains are open, the fire is lit, and the breakfast table is already judging you. You enter with grace, which is to say you do not trip over the hem of your gown this time. Your mother is seated at the head of the table, wearing the expression of a woman who's been up for hours and disapproves of most things, including you, toast, and Wednesdays. She eyes your hair. You feel it shift in response. You sit. She blinks. You sit wrong. You adjust. She nods imperceptibly, which is the closest you'll get to affection before Easter. The footman brings tea. You thank him. Your mother coughs softly. Too soft to thank you implies indifference. Too loud implies seduction. You correct your tone and try again. The second attempt is appropriately lukewarm. You sip. Wrong. You hold the handle improperly. You swirl before sipping, and you slurp. It was a soft slurp, barely audible to humans, but not to your mother, or the ghost of decorum hovering above her shoulder like a judgmental Victorian bat. She doesn't speak. She lifts her teacup and drinks in absolute silence. It is the silence of the grave. It is the silence of a woman who is memorizing your flaws to share with your aunt. Toast is offered. You reach for it with your left hand. A sin, you switch to your right. The damage is done. A cousin in the corner clears his throat. You butter the toast. You use too much butter. The crust flakes. A crumb lands on your lap. The crumb does not bounce. It rests. Intimately. A crumb that lingers becomes symbolic. You brush it off too eagerly. It flutters to the carpet like a fallen debutante. The room falls still. You have committed, roughly, 14 social crimes since waking. You have not fainted, which would have gained you sympathy. You have not wept, which might at least soften your image. You have, however, sighed, stretched, slurped, and buttered with abandon. And now, as your mother rises with the patience of a nun preparing for public execution, you understand something deep in your bones. The day has barely begun, and etiquette already wants you dead. The first thing you notice when you reach for your corset is that your spine has developed opinions. It creaks in protest, bends slightly to the left, and seems to whisper, "Why?" You ignore it. Victorian etiquette demands silence from both women and vertebrae. The corset lies there, limp and innocent, like it didn't ruin generations of women and a few wayward chairs. You lift it with reverence, and the vague terror one might reserve for a snake in a particularly judgmental bonnet. Mary enters the room holding the lacing cord like a priest holds holy water. You stretch out your arms. A mistake. It makes your ribs lift, which makes your waist wider, which makes the corset angry. You hold your breath as she wraps it around you. It's a delicate process, like mummification, but with more eye contact and less emotional closure. She pulls the laces. Your ribs fold. You consider your past decisions. Just a touch tighter. Your mother calls from the hallway, as if her ghost has possessed the wallpaper. Mary tightens. You blink. The light dims. You nod, not because you agree, but because it's the only movement you can manage without dislocating a lung. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth tug, your vision takes on a soft halo, like your soul is trying to escape through your tear ducts. There is a moment. Always a moment. where you ask yourself if this is truly worth it. Not life in general, just life with organs. But etiquette doesn't care about spleens. Etiquette cares about silhouettes. A lady's figure must resemble an hourglass, preferably one that's been stepped on by a horse and then politely denied medical attention. You pull the stays up, push the chemise down, and pray that nothing under the corset moves. Movement implies rebellion. You glance in the mirror. Your waist has vanished. Your arms hang like polite sausages at your sides. Your chest has been lifted to a height usually reserved for religious relics. You try to smile. Your cheeks twitch. That's enough. You're not expected to smile until music plays or someone mentions marzipan. Mary fastens the final hook with the solemnity of a woman closing a casket. You sway slightly. This is normal. Corsets were designed to make standing impressive, sitting dangerous, and reclining an act of defiance against God. You're gently guided to the dressing stool, where you perch like a reluctant gargoyle. "Is it snug?" Mary asks, as if your ears haven't just popped. You nod. She gives an approving grunt and begins the second round of adjustments, just in case your lower spine still feels optimistic. Outside, a bird chirps. You hear it through the window and immediately resent its entire skeleton. You imagine what it must be like to breathe with ease, to flap freely, to not worry if your lungs are visible through brocade. You try to flap. Nothing happens. You settle for blinking 3 times in rapid succession, which counts as a mild rebellion. The day's outfit requires structure. Petticoats, at least 3. A crinoline, possibly a bustle if the weather is flirtatious. Layers are added with the speed of tradition and the precision of a military parade. You are being built, brick by brick, into a monument to restraint. Your dress is pulled over your head. You raise your arms and immediately regret it. A puffed sleeve catches on your hair, pulling a pin loose. It dangles like a tiny sword of Damocles. Mary shoves it back in with the efficiency of a woman who has seen too much. The bodice closes with a series of tiny, impossible buttons that must have been designed by someone who hated fingers. You do not assist. Your arms are no longer part of your life. They hang by your sides like poorly trained soldiers waiting for orders. Mary mutters something about last season's stitching, and you nod in agreement, though you have no idea what she said. Your brain is currently using 80% of its capacity to remember how to stand upright without blacking out. Your mother appears at the door. She inspects you the way a general inspects a cannon. Her eyes flick over your waist, your neckline, the slight unevenness of your hem. She says nothing. She never says anything when she's truly disappointed. She just nods once, which is somehow worse than being disinherited. You look presentable, she says after a pause that could curdle cream. It's the highest compliment you'll receive before dinner. You walk to the hallway, or rather, you glide, because actual walking is out of the question. Your knees bend, but your hips do not. Your arms move, but only in whispers. The housemaid passes you and curtsies so low she nearly collapses. She's wearing a loose cotton frock and a soft apron and breathing freely. You try not to hate her. You fail. Downstairs, your sister is already seated, sipping tea with a spine so straight it looks like she swallowed a candlestick. Her corset is tighter than yours. You can tell by the way she hasn't blinked in 20 minutes. Her eyes are wide and glossy, like a fashionable deer caught in the social expectations of a dinner party. She nods at you. You nod back. It is the only communication permitted between women who are competing for the approval of a woman who hasn't smiled since the Crimean War. Breakfast is laid out on the sideboard. Toast, eggs, something pretending to be fruit. You approach, hover, and decide not to eat. Eating requires chewing. Chewing requires breath. Breath is a resource you currently do not possess. You hold a teacup. You sip. The tea is weak, bitter, perfect. Your corset tightens again, possibly from shame. There's a knock at the door. A suitor, perhaps, or the doctor, or a man selling buttons. It doesn't matter. You're already dressed, already bound, already sculpted into an ideal so precise that one misstep will send you clattering to the floor like a teacup kicked by God. You smile vaguely at the wallpaper. It's going to be a lovely day. Assuming you don't faint before noon, you descend the stairs like someone being led to a polite execution. Each tread creaks with the weight of familial expectations and roughly 10 pounds of petticoats. The smell of toast greets you in the hallway, mingled with a faint note of lavender furniture polish and repressed dreams. You take a breath, shallow, of course, and pass through the drawing room, where the chairs are all too upright and the upholstery disapproves of your posture. The breakfast room awaits, prim and terrifying. Light slants in through the lace curtains, illuminating the long oak table like an altar of shame. At its head sits your Aunt Dorothea, a woman of uncertain age and certain opinions. She is dressed in a severe shade of mauve that suggests recent mourning or an ongoing vendetta against happiness. Her gloves are still on, despite the indoor setting, as if she fears being contaminated by breakfast. You enter with what you hope is a graceful nod, though your corset prevents anything more ambitious than a neck flick. Your aunt's eyes follow you like a hawk that disapproves of your lineage. She does not speak. She merely lifts one brow by a fraction, and in that microscopic twitch, you understand that something about your presence has already disappointed her. Possibly your bangs. You take your seat with great care, not because of etiquette, but because the chair is upholstered in a fabric so ancient it might turn to dust beneath you. The cushion sighs in protest as you lower yourself. Your knees remain at the precise angle taught to you by Miss Weatherby's finishing school, a place where young women go to unlearn comfort. The table is arranged with military precision. Toast stacked like brittle playing cards. Porridge that looks like it has witnessed things. Soft-boiled eggs in silver cups, each staring blankly at the ceiling as though surprised to still exist. Tea sits in a delicate pot, floral and faintly accusatory. A single dish of jam sits untouched in the center of it all, gleaming like a trap. You reach for toast. You do so slowly, with the grace of someone performing a sacred rite. You lift a slice, brittle and narrow, and place it gently on your plate. You reach for the butter. You pick up the knife. You butter the knife. You butter the wrong side of the knife. Your aunt inhales through her nose, which is not technically a sound, but echoes through the room with the force of divine retribution. You freeze. Your hand, your crime, your entire family name trembles above the toast. You correct the knife. Too late. Somewhere, a vicar keels over mid-sermon, and no one knows why. You resume your attempt at breakfast. The toast cracks under your fingers. You try to break it delicately, but it shatters into sharp, judgmental shards. A corner lands on your lap. You do not reach for it. Reaching below the table suggests mischief or French ancestry. Instead, you pretend it doesn't exist and hope the maid removes it before someone writes about it in the family ledger. Your cousin Harriet arrives. She is younger than you by 3 years and smug by 5. Her waist is aggressively tiny and her hair curls in the way only people without internal monologues achieve. She greets Aunt Dorothea with the correct level of chirpy solemnity and takes her seat without incident. Her toast does not shatter. Her butter is applied with the elegance of a watercolorist. You hate her briefly and profoundly. You pour yourself tea, not too fast. Rushing implies desperation, but not too slow, or Aunt will assume you're daydreaming. You aim for dignified indifference. The tea flows. You add a sugar cube. 1, 2 is indulgent. None is joyless. 1 is safety. You stir, clockwise. Never counter. Counterclockwise is used by radicals and women with opinions. Aunt Dorothea finally speaks. Her voice is dry and echoing, like parchment left too long in the Sunday. We do not, I hope, require instruction in the matter of jam. The question is not a question. It is a trap wrapped in marmalade. You glance at the jam. You consider it. You look away. Harriet does not. Harriet takes the tiniest amount imaginable, dabs it on the edge of her toast like a woman painting a sacrificial rune, and places the knife back with the silent smugness of the blessed. You attempt to imitate her. Your hand is steady. Your heart is not. You scoop a modest amount and spread it with trembling grace. The toast makes a noise. It cracks. The jam slides. A droplet lands on your saucer. Aunt Dorothea blinks slowly, like a crocodile deciding whether to pounce. You sip your tea. The taste is pale and lemony and not at all helpful. You nod slightly, as though all is well. Across the table, the butler coughs to signal that someone has opened the window. Air flows into the room, scandalously. Your aunt lifts her hand to her temple as though struck by a minor breeze-related illness. The window is shut. Breakfast continues. You try the egg. The shell resists. You tap too lightly. Nothing. You tap again. Still nothing. You tap a third time. Harder. The shell gives way in one sudden, humiliating collapse. A piece flies onto your plate, landing next to a smear of jam in what now looks like an abstract painting of shame. You lower your eyes. You chew your toast. It tastes like penance. Harriet is speaking now about something innocuous. Piano, church flowers, the weather's decency. Her voice is the correct pitch, her phrasing delicate. Aunt Dorothea rewards her with a nod. You sip your tea again, wondering how early is too early to fake a fainting spell. Your mother enters late, wearing a frown and a shawl, and asks if anyone has seen the morning paper. Aunt Dorothea replies that ladies do not concern themselves with ink. You are not sure what this means. No One Island ink is a concept best left to men and scandal. You rise when the meal concludes. Not too quickly. You are not a dog. Not too slowly. You are not infirm. Your chair does not scrape. You leave your napkin neatly folded. You do not look back at the toast. It has betrayed you once, and will do so again. Outside the breakfast room, you finally exhale. Behind the closed door, Aunt Dorothea discusses your jam usage with your mother. Harriet is praised for her restraint. You press your palm to your corseted middle and wonder if anyone has ever truly enjoyed breakfast. Not just survived it, but savored it, laughed over it, broken bread without breaking protocol. You suspect not. You suspect Victorian etiquette has never been about nourishment, only performance, and crumbs, and quiet ruin. You're not sure when it became normal to be issued a weapon at breakfast, but here you are, holding a lace fan like it's a grenade disguised as chiffon. It's pale blue with ivory ribs and a painted pastoral scene involving sheep that look judgmental. The fan was presented to you by your Aunt Gertrude, without warning, and with the solemnity usually reserved for legal documents or particularly disobedient wills. She did not explain its use. She simply handed it over and slid a pamphlet across the table with the words, "The Language of the Fan," printed in Gothic script. There is no subtitle, but there might as well be "Ways to Ruin a Life in 3 Gestures or Less." The pamphlet is 16 pages long and weighs heavily on your soul. Page 1 greets you with a list of gestures that, when performed incorrectly, could lead to social disaster or a spontaneous engagement. You scan it nervously. Fan held to the left cheek. I desire your acquaintance. Fan touched to right temple. I am annoyed by your presence. Fan waved vigorously. You are in danger. Fan dropped. I accept. Accept what? Tea? A duel? A horse? It never says. You try to memorize the basics, which are neither basic nor memorable. Fan shut with force means anger, but fan open slowly means uncertainty, unless your elbow moves, in which case it means attraction, unless your wrist also tilts, in which case it means moral ruin. By page 4, you are sweating. You begin to wonder if this is a secret code or an elaborate prank invented by men to watch women fight each other over poorly timed breezes. You glance at the other women in the drawing room. Each holds a fan like it's an extension of her soul. Harriet's is pale pink and fluttering with the kind of casual elegance that suggests she understands irony but chooses not to use it. Your cousin Louisa rests hers against her chin in a way that says, "I might be reading your will in 6 months." You hold yours like it might bite. You flick it open experimentally. It snaps, loudly. Aunt Gertrude looks up. You smile weakly. You try again, this time more gently, and succeed in opening it halfway before it collapses like a dying moth. You attempt to flutter it. It jerks violently, sending a gust of air toward the vicar's wife, who blinks as though struck by heresy. You lower the fan. You consider setting it on fire. The pamphlet did not mention how to recover from fan-based aggression, so you pretend it didn't happen. This is the Victorian method for nearly everything. Louisa leans over and whispers that if you tap the fan 3 times on your left knee, it signals you're open to conversation about horse breeding. You ask if this is true. She smiles sweetly and tells you that if you have to ask, it's already too late. Tea is served. You sit rigidly, fan folded, praying it stays that way. A young man you don't recognize approaches the room with the confused gait of someone who has entered the wrong home or the wrong century. You recognize the look immediately. Eligible bachelor being flung at distant cousins in hopes of future estates and fewer scandals. His name is probably something like Reginald or Basil or Edward with opinions. He's holding gloves he has no intention of wearing and smiling with all the teeth he paid for. You feel your aunt's gaze before she speaks. "Show him your fan, dear," she says, as if you are not a person but an exhibit. You unfold it slowly, praying for divine intervention. The fan opens, slightly askew, the sheep staring more intently now. The young man bows. You nod. You try a flick. It is meant to signal polite disinterest. Instead, you perform something that resembles a semaphore distress signal. He perks up. You've told him you find him delightful. Louisa whispers behind her teacup. Possibly more. You freeze. You flick again. 2 short snaps. Now you've told him you disapprove of his shoes. You drop the fan. Reginald, Basil, Edward, whatever, stiffens. Aunt Gertrude clutches her pearls. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest that you've somehow insulted the monarchy. Louisa reaches down, retrieves your fan with a reverence usually reserved for relics, and places it in your lap like a dead bird. You consider apologizing, but according to the pamphlet, apologies must never be made aloud while holding lace. You smile instead. The wrong smile. It means jealousy, or theft, or both. Reginald nods once, solemnly, and excuses himself to go stare into a fern. Your aunt sighs, long and low. The pamphlet reappears in your line of vision. She taps it with one gloved finger, and you swear you can hear it judge you. You read on. There is a chapter titled Advanced Gestures, which includes such horrors as fanning with both hands and fanning while speaking, which is apparently tantamount to inviting someone into your will and your drawing room at the same time. There's also a warning. Never, under any circumstances, fan oneself while near a fireplace. It creates confusion. And occasionally, marriage. You study the diagrams. A fan held closed and resting on the lips means do not speak. You consider making this your permanent pose. Another image shows a woman hiding behind her fan entirely. The caption reads, "Complete dismissal. You feel seen." Later, as guests trickle out and tea turns into social residue, you sit alone near the window, fan balanced delicately in your lap like a paperweight made of fear. You try a slow flutter. It works. A light breeze. No one dies. The pamphlet lies folded beside you, like a smug tutor waiting for your next mistake. You glance down and see a handwritten note inside the back cover in a familiar, spidery script. Remember, if all else fails, drop the fan, faint, and wait for someone else to explain. You blink. It's in your grandmother's hand. You look up at the others. Louisa is fanning herself in a loop that clearly says, "I'm bored but observant." Harriet fans slowly, steadily, like a woman with nothing to prove and everything to hide. Your aunt watches you from her chair, expression unreadable. You lift your fan. You flutter it once, then again. Somewhere across the room, Louisa narrows her eyes. It has begun. You sit at the escritoire, a piece of furniture specifically designed to make you feel inadequate. Its drawers smell of dried violets and expectations. A single sheet of cream-colored stationery lies in front of you, pristine and smug. You stare at it as if it owes you money. The pen waits beside it, long and sharpened, like a judgmental finger dipped in ink. The inkwell reflects your face. It looks nervous. This is your fourth attempt. The first began with, "Dear," and then stalled for 20 minutes while you debated whether "Madam" was too cold and "Dearest" too familiar, considering the recipient once tried to push you into a pond during the May social. The second began with, "Thank you for the charming luncheon," before you remembered it was not a luncheon but a funeral. The third was promising until you blotted the S in gracious so badly it looked like you'd written grayfish, which may be a food but not a compliment. Now, you begin again. The pen feels unwieldy in your gloved hand, but etiquette dictates gloves, and etiquette does not care about hand cramps or smudging. You write slowly, forming each letter like you're trying to earn their trust. "Dear Cousin Millicent," you begin. The words look decent. You exhale through your nose. Progress. You move on to the body of the letter. It is a thank you note, which means it must contain neither sincerity nor excessive emotion. Anything that sounds like you genuinely enjoyed yourself could imply desperation or romantic entanglement, and you are only permitted one of those per quarter. You write, "I am ever so grateful for the delightful evening," and then pause. You were not grateful. There was a goose loose in the dining room for most of it. But truthful and appropriate, parted ways around the 1830s, and they haven't spoken since. You continue. "The cutlets were most agreeable." This is true if you interpret agreeable to mean chewy but edible. You hesitate. Is cutlets too blunt? Does it sound greedy? You scratch it out and replace it with fair. Fair is vague. Fair could be anything from roast quail to a boiled sock. You nod to yourself. Vagueness is safety. Your pen hesitates mid-sentence. A drop of ink trembles at the tip, fat and foreboding. You lean back. It drops, right in the middle of gratitude. It blooms like a spider dying of embarrassment. You dab it with blotting paper. Now it looks like gras. You stare at it. You consider writing over it. You consider setting the house on fire. You fold the paper and begin again. Fifth draft. You've gone through more paper than a scandalous poet. Your inkwell is nearly empty. Your dignity is a suggestion. You start once more. "Dearest Cousin Mammoth." You blink. You did not write Mammoth. You wrote Millicent. Except you didn't. Somewhere between Millicent and Madam, your brain took a detour through prehistory. You look down and see Mammoth in fine cursive, underlined accidentally by the tremble of your wrist. You stare at it for a full minute. You seal it anyway. Etiquette says to never cross out mistakes. To do so implies carelessness. Etiquette does not mention what to do when you accidentally refer to your cousin as an extinct herbivore. You dab a bit of lavender water on the envelope, so it smells like composure and not panic. You reach for the wax seal. It is heavy and warm from the sunbeam that slants across your desk. You press it into the wax with shaky finality. The letter is now legally irreversible. You set it aside, hands trembling like you've just completed a duel or a seance. You glance around the room. No one saw. No one will know, except your cousin. and whoever she shows it to, and the vicar, and possibly the entire county if she's feeling theatrical, which she usually island. Still, you've completed the task. This is what matters. According to Lady Blenkinsop's Compendium of Correspondence, thank you notes must be written within 48 hours or the favor is void and your soul forfeited. You've met the deadline, if not the spirit. You set the letter on the silver tray near the doorway and turn back to your desk, only to realize with horror that you forgot to include the date. The letter is undated. You clutch the desk. Is that forgivable? Will she assume it was late? Will she assume you've forgotten the Gregorian calendar altogether? Will this be the thing that prevents you from being invited to her infamous August picnic, which always includes parlor games, pickled things, and that one man with eyebrows that suggest criminality? You almost retrieve the letter. Almost. But the wax is already sealed and etiquette forbids tampering. Only scoundrels and anarchists open sealed letters. You sit, staring at your empty stationery box. You have 4 sheets left, and 3 of them are slightly warped from the time you left them near the window. The 4th is pristine but has a faint watermark shaped like a fish, which you suspect is a printer's error but may also be a warning. Your aunt enters. She sees the ink on your fingers and nods grimly. Letter writing is the measure of a woman's moral spine, she says. You have never seen her write a letter in your life. She picks up the sealed envelope and raises an eyebrow. Mammoth? She asks. You say nothing. She nods again. Bold. Later, you hear the maid giggling in the hallway as she prepares the post. The envelope is gone, your reputation sealed inside like a butterfly with poor spelling. You watch her walk down the path toward the village box. There's no stopping it now. Your words are on their way, galloping across the countryside like a runaway joke. Somewhere, in a drawing room filled with aggressive doilies, Cousin Millicent will unfold the letter and read it aloud to a group of women with nothing better to do than interpret your handwriting like scripture. And when she reaches the part where you address her as Mammoth, they will pause, they will blink, and then they will laugh. The kind of high-pitched, fluttery laugh that never quite reaches the eyes. And Etiquette will sit quietly in the corner, sipping tea, and judging you forever. You step onto the gravel path and the sun immediately assumes you're up to something. It peers through the clouds in that particularly Victorian way, dimly, with disapproval. Your boots crunch once, and the world tilts into scandal. The front gate is visible in the distance, but the sheer act of stepping toward it, unaccompanied, already marks you as either tragically orphaned or morally suspicious. You take another step. Somewhere, a governess clutches her pearls. The air is cool, damp, and rife with implications. Your skirts brush the tops of your boots, the hem threatening to touch the ground and spark a minor religious crisis. You've worn gloves, naturally, and a bonnet that feels less like a hat and more like a portable accusation. You carry a parasol, not for the Sunday. It's doing its best impression of a dim candle. But because propriety requires an accessory that can double as both shield and social deterrent, you walk slowly, not because you want to, but because walking briskly suggests agency, and agency leads to jazz and divorce. You maintain the pace of someone being trailed by both a ghost and a chaperone. A bird sings overhead, and even that feels a bit forward. You do not acknowledge it. Birds are not in your calling circle. At the end of the path, a man appears. He is walking, as if this is not a delicate time of day or an area reserved for ladies in hedges. He is of acceptable height, moderately clean, and tipping his hat already, which means you've entered a duel. You must respond. You nod. Mistake. It's a modest nod. A small, respectable incline of the chin, accompanied by the soft, unreadable smile you practiced in the mirror between embroidery sessions. But the nod has already left your head, and now exists in the world, naked and unchecked. He sees it. He smiles. You are now betrothed, or at least you would be, according to Mrs. Turnby, who once declared that a glance across a tea tray meant you were ready to name children after his ancestors. You try to keep walking, carefully unsmiling, trying to walk that invisible line between frost and flirtation. He pauses as if to say something. You veer slightly, as if admiring a bush. It is not a notable bush. It is, in fact, mostly sticks. Still, you murmur, "How charming," aloud, in case anyone is listening and might otherwise think you're plotting sedition. You pass him. The air holds the scent of grass, damp wool, and implication. You've gone no more than 30 paces when you hear the unmistakable crunch of another set of boots. A second man, this one older, with mutton chops that say parliamentary opinions, and a coat that suggests he collects war medals or troubled nieces. He nods, slowly. You keep your face neutral. No nods this time. You've already got one engagement to deal with. He tips his hat. The brim is wide, like a ship's sail. You falter. Now you must nod, or you'll be labeled a cold fish. You give the tiniest nod possible, one that could be mistaken for a sneeze held in. He looks satisfied. You are now married twice, and you haven't even reached the garden gate. Ahead is the public lane, which is not technically forbidden but definitely frowned upon unless you're with a man, or an older lady, or an ill-tempered lapdog. You have none of these. You step onto the path. The gravel shifts beneath your boots in a way that suggests consequences. You breathe. You pass a milkmaid. She looks at you like you're trying to steal her station in life. You pass 2 children who stop their play to stare as though your very presence has changed the weather. A third child, possibly feral, points at your bonnet and screams something about a head flower. You keep walking. A breeze rises and flirts with your skirts. You try to hold them in place with one hand and maintain grip on your parasol with the other, while looking as though none of this requires effort. You've trained for this. You've read about it in The Graceful Woman's Guide to Street Navigation. Page 12 clearly stated, "If the wind lifts your hem, lower your soul." A horse trots past, dragging a cart filled with turnips and menace. The driver barely glances your way, but his hat twitches upward. Another hat tip. You do not respond. You stare at a tree. You are a tree. Trees do not nod. Trees do not Wednesday. You reach the far corner of the lane and pause. This was meant to be a short walk, a stroll, an acceptable feminine perambulation. But you now carry the social weight of 3 engagements, 4 accusations, and the distinct possibility that your bonnet is crooked. You consider turning back. But turning back would mean passing the same men again, in reverse, which implies retraction. And nothing is ruder than a woman taking back her nod. You forge on. A carriage rounds the bend. The driver stares. You can see it. The weighing of your unaccompanied status, the tilt of your spine, the lilt of your parasol. He will tell someone. You know it in your bones. By tea, your aunt will hear that you were seen wandering alone, looking decided, which is Victorian for unraveling. You glance into a shop window to distract yourself, see your reflection, and wince. Your bonnet is, in fact, askew. Not dramatically, but enough to imply recent scandal or fast walking. You adjust it subtly. You try to look like you're admiring embroidery. You accidentally admire an axe. You turn the corner. A gentleman passes you and murmurs, "Madam," with the sort of breathy courtesy that makes your spine go stiff. You do not nod. You blink once, in Morse code. You keep walking. The sky has darkened slightly. It is not late, but the clouds are thinking about gossip. You take this as your cue to return home before you're mistaken for a woman with ideas. You turn back, walking as slowly as you can without appearing hunted. Your parasol begins to droop. Your shoes, once polished to a reflective sheen, now bear the dust of 3 classes in a public assumption. As you pass the men again, you do not look at them. You do not breathe. You become mist. You become an absence. You glide past like a rumor already disproved. At the gate, you exhale. You re-enter the house. Your aunt looks up from her needlework with narrowed eyes and asks, "Did you run?" You say no. And she says, "Pity. At least then you'd have an excuse." You sit, bonnet slightly skewed, parasol limp, and begin mentally cataloging who now expects a wedding invitation. All because you needed some air. The gloves are cream, not white, not ivory, not ecru, cream. A soft, buttery shade that whispers of dairy and indecision. You hadn't thought twice when selecting them this morning, nestled as they were in your drawer beside your morning gloves, your Sunday gloves, and your gloves for when the weather is non-committal. They had seemed innocent, neutral, subtle, but now, standing in the drawing room of Lady Tewkesbury's townhouse, surrounded by women whose gloves are starched and white enough to be knighted, you realize your error is not subtle at all. Your hands are social suicide. You tuck them beneath your shawl and smile in the brittle, practiced way that says, "I'm not sweating, you're sweating." Across the room, Mrs. Renfield, whose life mission is to catalog the moral decay of others, lifts her lorgnette. She sees your gloves. She does not blink. She simply sips her tea like it's arsenic and continues to live. You consider removing the gloves altogether, but this, too, is a trap. Gloves may be removed, yes, but only in certain places and for certain reasons. To dine, yes. To pray, sometimes. To play the piano, always. To shake a man's hand? Never, unless he is foreign, or titled, or on fire. Then perhaps, maybe, the pamphlets are vague. You clutch your reticule tightly, as if your reputation is hiding inside it. Beside you, your cousin Lavinia whispers, "They'll think you're French." She says it like it's a slur. You resist the urge to ask whether that's worse than being nouveau. The woman across from you is wearing gloves with pearl buttons. Pearl buttons. That's confidence you cannot afford. A footman arrives bearing a tray of sherry. As he approaches, you reach for a glass, but hesitate. Are you meant to remove your glove for this? Is sherry intimate? You turn your head slightly, hoping to glimpse what the others are doing, but they are all effortlessly correct, their gloved fingers holding stemmed glasses with the ease of lifelong deception. You commit. You grab the glass with your gloved hand. Aunt Judith gasps softly. You've just implied, according to her 1891 edition of Lady Russell's Handbook of Feminine Decorum, that you were raised in a barn by wolves. Wolves with bad table manners. You sip anyway, because it's too late now and sherry tastes like the end of hope. A man approaches. Not just any man. Mr. Halbrook. Tall, with the kind of sideburns that suggest ambition, and a waistcoat embroidered with something that looks like either thistles or unresolved tension. He bows. You incline your head. So far, so good. Then, he extends his hand. You freeze. You are holding your sherry in your gloved right hand. To shake with the left would be a diplomatic incident. You panic. You transfer the glass to your left, which causes a brief wobble in your elbow. You reach out your right hand, and you forget to remove your glove. His fingers close around yours, gloved and clammy, and there is a brief flicker of confusion on his face. It passes. He is polite, but it hangs in the air between you, invisible and damning. You withdraw your hand. You laugh a little too loudly at his remark about the weather. The weather is entirely unremarkable. He moves on. You look down and realize the glove on your right hand is now slightly askew. You pull it off discreetly, intending to straighten it. You hear a sharp intake of breath from behind you. You have removed one glove. In public, indoors, unmarried. You may as well have removed your corset and recited limericks. You slide the glove back on in a flurry of fingers and shame, but in your rush, it goes on inside out. The seams are now on the outside, visible and smug. You try to discreetly reverse it again, but the fingers bunch and twist like defiant worms. A pearl catches on your ring, and now the glove is half on, half off, and fully cursed. Across the room, someone titters. You consider leaving, fleeing into the mist, changing your name, becoming a governess in a remote parish where no one knows your glove history. But your aunt is watching you with the expression of someone who has not yet decided whether you will be disinherited or merely exiled. You excuse yourself and slip down the hall toward the powder room. Once there, you close the door behind you and stare at yourself in the mirror. You look like a woman who has fought a glove and lost. Your bonnet is listing to one side. Your cheeks are flushed. Your glove is still on inside out. You peel it off. You breathe. You turn it right side in. You begin the slow process of putting it back on, carefully aligning each finger, smoothing the creases. It fits, finally, snug and smug. You look down. It's the wrong glove. You have two left gloves. You stare at your reflection. You briefly consider chewing through one of them out of spite. Instead, you switch them, squeezing your right hand into the left-handed glove like a foot into the wrong shoe. It resists. You prevail. It looks mostly correct, unless someone peers too closely at the stitching. You rejoin the party. You smile. You position yourself near a fern, where the lighting is dim and the conversation sparse. You clutch your reticule like it's the only thing keeping you in the realm of the living. Lavinia joins you, her expression one of smug survival. "You handled that beautifully," she says. You nod, unsure which part she's referring to, your social spiral, or the act of not weeping openly into your gloves. The music begins. A waltz. Pairs begin to form. Mr. Halbrook is dancing with the pearl-buttoned woman. Her gloves are flawless. So is her footwork. So is her future. You remain by the fern, hands folded, gloves proper, and cream, which is not white, not ivory, just wrong enough. The tea arrives as it always does, on a silver tray with the silent drama of a coronation and the implied threat of scandal. You are seated among lace and judgment. Around you, women perch on the edges of chairs like birds poised to peck out reputations. There is a tension in the air, a stillness only broken by the occasional clink of a teaspoon and the faint rustle of taffeta shifting in disapproval. You are handed the pot. This is a test. You smile, the tight-lipped kind practiced before mirrors and magistrates. You lift the teapot by the handle, and the lid shifts slightly, giving you a brief glimpse of the dark, scalding chaos within. You've practiced this. You've read the pamphlets. You've endured your aunt's lectures delivered with the gravity of a naval court-martial. Still, your hand trembles. You pour. A thin stream of brown gold fills the porcelain cup. It pools at the bottom like liquid anxiety. You pause, counting silently to 4. The universally accepted number that implies elegance without indulgence. You set the pot down gently. It clicks against the tray with the tiniest sound, but it might as well be a gong. You reach for the sugar tongs. They are delicate, shaped like tiny bird claws, and deeply judgmental. You pluck 1 cube, only 1. 2 implies gluttony or revolutionary spirit, and let it plop gently into the cup. No splashes. Splashes suggest barbarism. Milk follows, just enough to cloud the tea without altering its fundamental character. The color is now the shade of doubt. Perfect. You stir, clockwise. You are almost sure. You've heard both arguments. Clockwise signifies social grace, but counterclockwise indicates you've been educated in France, which, depending on the room, could be either damning or dazzling. You choose clockwise. The spoon moves in small, controlled circles, creating a quiet vortex of stress. You do not let it touch the sides. That is the worst offense of all. Clinking is a crime punishable by whispers. You remove the spoon and place it on the saucer at a precise angle. It must not rest in the cup. That is the realm of toddlers and anarchists. You lift the cup. Do not grip. You pinch the handle delicately, like it's made of rumors and bone china. Your pinky remains relaxed, not extended. Despite popular belief, pointing it skyward does not denote class, but rather signals a desire to be struck by lightning. You bring the cup to your lips. You sip, not too loudly. The sip must be audible only to yourself. It must not disturb conversation, nor suggest that you are in any way enjoying the tea. Enjoyment implies want. Want implies hunger. Hunger implies a lack of upbringing. You sip again, slightly less certain of yourself. The tea is tepid, somehow both oversteeped and underwhelming. It tastes faintly of boiled dust and resignation. You do not grimace. You will never grimace again. You will drink this tea as if it is the elixir of restraint. You have no other choice. Beside you, Miss Abernathy sips with the calculated nonchalance of a woman who once held a viscount's attention for 3 entire dances. Her hat is covered in silk violets. Her teacup matches her gloves. She has never made a mistake in her life. You try to hold your cup in a similar manner. Your hand cramps immediately. Across the room, someone slurps. Time freezes. Heads turn. Eyes narrow. Mouths tighten. It is Mrs. Penwhistle. She is old enough to get away with it, which makes it worse. The slurp echoes in your soul. The silence that follows is louder than a sermon. She does not apologize. She sips again, softer this time. But the damage is done. The social equilibrium has shifted. You attempt conversation. This is not encouraged during the first 3 sips, but your hands are shaking, and you need something to distract from the way your saucer is starting to tilt. You mention the weather. It has rained. Everyone agrees. You mention the garden. Everyone nods. You suggest the roses are blooming early. A murmur of potential scandal passes through the room. Roses do not bloom until they are expected to, and early blooming suggests poor character or foreign soil. You sip again, this time too deeply. The tea hits the back of your throat like a lukewarm reprimand. You try not to cough. Coughing suggests illness, and illness suggests weakness, and weakness is a gateway to spinsterhood. You smile and blink rapidly. It works. Barely. The plate of biscuits arrives. You have never hated anything more. You are meant to take one. Only one. It must be eaten in 2 bites. Not 3. That's childish. Not 1. That's vulgar. The crumbs must remain on the plate. Not on your lap. Not on your chin. You select a biscuit that looks structurally sound and fragile enough to snap under minimal pressure. You break it in half, which creates a faint but audible crack. You chew. It tastes like sweetened sawdust. You chew as if you are processing memories, not food. Your jaw works slowly, gracefully. You do not open your mouth. You do not make a sound. You do not exist. You place the remaining half on the edge of the saucer. This is wrong, of course, but you have no plate. You were not given a plate. You have failed before you began. Aunt Judith glares from across the room. She is not drinking her tea. She holds it, as if to remind everyone she could, if she wanted, but chooses not to. That is power. Her gloves are spotless. Her teaspoon never moved. You will never be Aunt Judith. Another sip. You are nearly finished. The bottom of the cup shows faint leaves. You wonder briefly if you can read your fortune in them. It probably says something about doom and dry scones. You place the cup gently onto the saucer. It clinks. Slightly. You die inside. A clock chimes. Tea time is nearly over. Conversation begins to rise. Women begin to shift, slowly, as though awakening from an etiquette-induced trance. You stand. You thank your hostess with the proper number of syllables and vowels. You do not curtsy. You do not breathe too loudly. You smile with only the corners of your mouth. As you exit the room, you catch sight of your reflection in the hall mirror. You look calm, civilized, polished. You have never been closer to collapse. You hold the calling card like it's a confession. Thick paper, embossed letters, slightly floral scent. A small rectangle with the social weight of a cannonball. Your name stares back at you in rigid print, flanked by the invisible pressure of generations of etiquette and at least 3 duchesses who once fainted for less. You are standing on the front steps of Mrs. Atherton's townhome, card trembling in your gloved fingers, the door knocker leering at you like it knows everything you've ever done wrong, including the thing with the jam spoon and the bishop's cat. You knock once. The door opens too quickly, as if the butler has been trained to ambush. He looks at you the way one might regard an improperly dressed soufflé, surprised, vaguely insulted, and unsure what happens next. You hesitate because you've forgotten which tray to use. The card tray? The silver one? The one on the left? Unless it's Tuesday? Is today Tuesday? You've never hated a weekday more. He gestures toward a table just inside the hall where 2 trays await like co-conspirators. One is lined with green felt. The other has an ornate rim and the kind of polish that says it hasn't been touched since the Crimean War. You panic. You place your card on the felt tray. He lifts an eyebrow. It's the wrong tray. You know it's the wrong tray because he doesn't move. He simply stares at the card, like it has personally insulted his ancestors. You consider taking it back and placing it on the other tray, but etiquette says once a card touches a surface, it is essentially sacred and cannot be moved unless you are a queen or on fire. You nod politely and retreat down the steps, hoping the gesture somehow conveys, "Please do not tell your mistress I may have committed symbolic warfare." Later that afternoon, you learn you were also early. You were meant to leave the card between the hours of 3 and 4, and it is currently 2:45. This is not merely a scheduling misstep, it is a declaration of chaos. You have implied, with your presence, that Mrs. Atherton does not keep proper time or boundaries, and now she will spend the evening wondering if you also rearranged her umbrella stand out of spite. The next morning, the gossip begins. You overhear it at the dressmaker's. Did you hear she folded the top right corner? One woman hisses behind a bolt of plum satin. The other gasps. Not the top, right? She whispers, as if discussing treason. That means you leave before you can hear what it means. You do not want to know. You never want to know again. You just wanted to leave a card. That's all it was supposed to be. A polite hello, wrapped in cardstock. Instead, you have sent a coded message in a dialect you do not speak, and now you may have challenged a woman to social combat or informed her that her niece is unwelcome in your drawing room. And the dog. There's always something about the dog. Mrs. Atherton's dog, a mop with aspirations named Parsnip, was not at the door, but you're told folding the top right corner of a card means you object to a household pet. The left corner means condolences. The bottom right means, I called in person. The bottom left means, I'll never forgive you. Folding no corners means, I am a ghost. You folded the top right corner. You have accused Parsnip of crimes. Your aunt receives a note from Mrs. Atherton's butler, an oblique thing written in cursive so sharp it might draw blood. It inquires whether Miss G would prefer to explain her intention in person, or if her disdain for the Atherton household is best left in cryptic print. You consider moving to Wales. Instead, you write a reply. You keep it short. You do not fold any corners. You deliver it by foot, wearing a hat so wide it could block shame. The butler eyes you again. The tray remains unchanged. You hesitate, then place the new note directly atop your original calling card, as if to smother it. That evening, Mrs. Atherton arrives unannounced. She brings Parsnip. You sit across from her, smiling with your mouth but not your eyes, and attempt to discuss anything but cardstock. She brings it up immediately. I was most intrigued by your message, she says, stroking the dog like it's the barrel of a loaded gun. Such daring interpretation of tradition. You apologize. You explain. You flounder. She listens. lips pursed like she's holding in the urge to call for smelling salts or a fencing instructor. You swear on Queen Victoria's bunion that you meant no offense. She nods once. Of course, she says. But you understand I've already told Lady Dithermore that your card implied a duel. She's quite thrilled. She's ordering gloves. Parsnip sneezes. You laugh. It's a brittle sound, somewhere between a hiccup and hysteria. By the time she leaves, you have no idea whether peace has been made or whether you'll be expected to meet her at dawn on a moor, armed only with parasols and deeply rooted generational spite. Your card, you later discover, has been preserved. It's framed, hung in Mrs. Atherton's morning room between a miniature of her cousin's third husband and a taxidermy canary. Guests pause to look at it. They tilt their heads. They wonder what it means. It means nothing. It means everything. And now, whenever someone receives your card, they examine the corners with surgical intensity, as though decoding a prophecy. Folded or flat, every crease is a headline. Every edge is a sermon. You begin leaving them blank, unembellished, dropped only on Thursdays, at precisely 4 o'clock, with no corners folded and no message attached. Even this is interpreted as deliberate. You've become a mystery, or worse, a woman who does not fear the card tray. And in Victorian society, that's practically a revolution. The parlor is a battlefield disguised in chintz. The wallpaper is aggressively floral, the sort that seems like it could whisper judgment if you lean too close. A piano tinkles in the background, though no one is playing it. You stand in the center of the room, holding a wooden hoop like it's a cursed artifact, while a dozen pairs of eyes assess whether your grip suggests virtue or seduction. You are playing graces. You do not want to play graces. You would rather be buried alive beneath volumes of Godey's Lady's Book. But you were invited to light amusements, and light amusements in Victorian society always carry the emotional weight of a murder trial. Your opponent, your partner, your executioner, is a man named Timothy. Timothy has the unfortunate air of someone who once read a book on Greek philosophy and never recovered. He has a thin mustache and a waistcoat that matches the color of melancholy. He bows with more solemnity than the occasion demands, then hands you 2 slender wooden rods and announces, "Shall we?" Like he's proposing a duel or a secret affair. The goal is to toss the hoop back and forth using the rods, a game designed either for social bonding or emotional trauma. You attempt to look composed. Timothy flings the hoop. It wobbles through the air like a stunned duck and lands near your feet. Everyone watches. You are meant to catch it. You are also meant to do it gracefully. As the name of the game so helpfully implies, you crouch, slowly, demurely, and scoop the hoop with your sticks, avoiding eye contact with both the hoop and Timothy, as if acknowledging either will invite a scandal. You fling it back. It veers to the left and hits a fern. Someone gasps. This is not a game. This is a referendum on your femininity. Mrs. Dalrymple tuts from the divan. Her fan snaps open with the kind of flourish that suggests generational disapproval. She whispers something to Miss Featherstone, who nods as if you've just confessed to plotting the downfall of the empire. Across the room, a spinster aunt rearranges her collar, as if to signal she is no longer related to you. You try again. This time, the hoop flies cleanly. Too cleanly. Timothy catches it and smiles, a thin-lipped smirk that implies either triumph or trapped gas. You're not sure which. He flicks the hoop back with unnecessary flair. It arches toward you. You position your sticks. You brace. You catch it. And that, apparently, is the problem, because you caught it with too much ease, too much instinct, as if you've done this before, as if you've played graces in dim gardens with questionable cousins or, worse, foreigners. The room tenses. Timothy clears his throat. Mrs. Dalrymple fans harder. Miss Featherstone narrows her eyes like she's recalculating your dowry in real time. You attempt a smile, the sort that says, "This is perfectly fine and not at all suggestive." The hoop twirls in your hands like it has secrets. You feel your corset creak with stress. You toss it back. Timothy misses. It bounces off his knee and rolls under a chaise lounge. There is an audible silence, not just a pause, but a silence that feels layered, like a cake of dismay, frosted with confusion and topped with a single cherry of insult. Timothy retrieves the hoop with the delicate resentment of a man unaccustomed to public failure. He adjusts his cuffs. He adjusts his pride. You realize too late that your successful catch has shifted the narrative. You're no longer a fumbling debutante. You're a player, not of games, but of hearts. The hoop has become a symbol, a silent scandal spinning between you and Timothy like an accusation. You try to stand still, to fade into the wallpaper, but you are now the woman who caught the hoop too well. Someone mentions you must have practiced. This is said with the tone used for embezzled or undressed. You want to protest. You want to explain that your only practice has been dodging expectations and carrying books you're not allowed to admit you read. But instead you nod, because to protest is to draw more attention, and to draw attention is to accelerate your descent into social infamy. Timothy smiles again. It is not kind. You toss the hoop one more time, deliberately underhanded, subtly wrong. It sails crookedly. He misses. Balance is restored. The audience exhales. Someone claps. You are dismissed. Later, over tepid lemonade and biscuits that might as well be chalk, you overhear your name spoken in the corner by two girls with matching hair ribbons and matching levels of condescension. "She played like a French girl," one whispers. "Or an actress," says the other. You are now both. You are also, apparently, dangerous. By the time you return home, your cheeks ache from smiling, and your ears ring with passive compliments. Your mother asks how the afternoon went. You say it was diverting. She smiles like, "That's the correct answer." You don't mention Timothy or the hoop, or the fact that you have become a parlor legend by accident. You retreat to your room and sit on the edge of your bed, corset unyielding, hair heavy with pins and implications. You stare at your gloves. You wonder if they, too, now carry meaning. Tomorrow you will be invited to croquet. You already dread it. The dining room smells faintly of roasted meat and quiet judgment. Candlelight flickers off silver so polished you could see your sins in it. You've been summoned to dinner like a knight to a duel, and your armor is lace, etiquette, and the whispered warning your aunt hissed at you before the gong. Don't say anything about ducks, or France, or digestion. 12 courses await, arrayed like a test you didn't study for. The table stretches on, a mahogany expanse broken only by doilies, bread plates, and your mounting anxiety. Each setting has more utensils than any one person has business handling. The forks alone are intimidating, an army of prongs fanned out in militant precision. One is for oysters, one is for salad, one is for spiritual reckoning. You can't be sure. You sit. You try not to exhale too forcefully. The chair creaks anyway, like a tattletale. Across from you, Lady Morton adjusts her lorgnette and appraises you the way one might assess a suspicious stain. She is dressed in black velvet, with the demeanor of someone who has never burped and would call the police if you did. Next to her is her grandson, a pale young man named Sebastian who smells of book mold and has never once blinked at the correct moment. The butler glides in with the first course, consommé, a clear soup so transparent it feels like an accusation. You lift your spoon, gently, from the outside of the arrangement, like you were told, and dip with what you pray is ladylike restraint. The broth tastes like warm apology. You are proud. You have not yet ruined anything. Then you say, "Moist." It slips out during a compliment. "The duck is moist," you say, meaning it as praise. The room halts like a carriage with a snapped wheel. Somewhere, a wine glass clinks dramatically to the floor. You freeze mid-bite. Lady Morton inhales through her teeth. Sebastian looks personally betrayed. You do not apologize. Apologizing would only confirm that something has happened. You pretend the glass never existed. The second course arrives. Fish. You reach for a knife, but it's the wrong one. You realize this halfway through sawing a suspicious-looking fillet when you catch the footman's subtle wince. You are massacring the haddock with a knife reserved for poultry. You swap mid-slice. A glob of butter slides onto your lap. You dab discreetly. You wonder if one can dissolve under a tablecloth. Conversation swells around you like a tide you are forbidden to swim in. No one has addressed you directly yet, which means you must not speak. You may smile. You may nod. You may faint gracefully if necessary, but words are for those to whom they are first offered. This rule was forged by someone who feared what women might say if they were allowed to begin. But the silence becomes unbearable. You try to contribute. You mention the weather. You mention how damp it has been. You say moist again. Sebastian flinches. You are offered a roll. You break it in half with your hands, which you now realize is a crime. Bread must be broken quietly, in small pinches, with reverence. You have committed carbohydrate heresy. The fifth course is game. The meat is sinewy, with the taste of something that once had opinions. You chew, slowly, a bit too slowly. The footman comes by with a sauce. You nod, forgetting that nodding is ambiguous. He pours. Too much. Now your plate resembles a crime scene. You laugh. It is soft, but it is a laugh nonetheless. You have forgotten that laughter must be calibrated. Lady Morton narrows her eyes like a telescope honing in on a distant social faux pas. She tilts her head toward the hostess, a baroness with a face like undercooked pastry, and whispers something behind her glove. The seventh course involves asparagus. You pick it up. You should not have picked it up. The room, which had briefly forgotten you, remembers. You quickly put it down and reach for your fork, but your gloves are off. Because gloves must be removed before the soup course, unless you're in mourning, unless it's an informal luncheon, unless someone sneezes within 6 feet of you, in which case all rules revert to 1,843 standards. The asparagus wilts. By the ninth course, you have stopped trying. You sip from the wrong glass. You lean too close to the candelabra. You nod to a gentleman before he has acknowledged your existence, which, by Victorian rules, is the equivalent of eloping in the night with his valet. Someone passes the cheese tray. You reach out. Your sleeve grazes the tablecloth. A salt cellar falls over. It doesn't break, but the noise is seismic. You are now spoken about in hushed tones. Someone starts talking loudly about embroidery, the Victorian version of changing the subject from a murder. Lady Morton fans herself like she's about to swoon. You consider joining her, if only to escape. The final course is fruit. It arrives in a bowl with no instructions. You stare at it, untrusting. The grapes have menace. The knife provided is small, almost judgmental in its daintiness. You attempt to cut a pear. It launches across the table and lands in Sebastian's lap. There is a pause. He looks down. He looks up. He says nothing. You are relocated to a seat near the kitchen door. It is not said aloud, but the message is clear. You are now a buffer between the family and the help, a position of limbo reserved for those who said moist twice and committed ungentlemanly fruit aggression. You eat your grapes silently, one at a time. Later, as the guests leave and carriages are summoned, you linger at the threshold. You thank the hostess with the smile of a woman who knows she will not be invited back, but is too tired to care. She smiles back with the tight politeness reserved for charity cases and criminal nieces. You descend the steps. The night air is cold and merciful. You breathe it in like rebellion. You are summoned to the piano like a condemned woman to the gallows, except with more tulle and considerably worse lighting. The instrument looms in the corner of the parlor, glossy and judgmental, as if it remembers every note you've ever missed and is eager to misbehave again. A group of guests forms a semicircle behind you, their expressions hovering somewhere between polite anticipation and hunger for social collapse. Your aunt gestures with the flourish of someone announcing the execution of a scandalous goose. "Play something charming, dear," she says, which in Victorian code translates to, "Entertain them, but not too well, lest they think you're trying." You sit, spine straight, knees clenched, mind blank. The bench is too low. The room is too quiet. Your fingers hover above the keys with the trembling hesitation of someone about to lie to God. You know 4 songs. 2 of them are lullabies. One is Chopin, and one is a piece you invented at age 10 that includes a suspicious number of accidental C sharps and ends in a dramatic slam that your piano teacher once called emotionally concerning. The lullabies are too childish. The invented piece is likely treasonous. That leaves Chopin. You begin. Immediately, the notes betray you. The opening sounds like mourning with a hangover. You push forward, trying to wrangle the melody into shape, but your left hand starts racing your right, and for a brief, unholy moment, you are playing Chopin as if he were being chased through a hedge maze. Someone coughs. You slow down. You skip a note. You improvise. You are now playing not exactly Chopin, but close enough for polite company. Your aunt stiffens. "I do wish," she says to the woman beside her, loudly enough to qualify as a minor performance, "that our young ladies would resist the urge for such modern trash." Not as stated was nowhere game to the trast. Had Lees with an added, modern, trash, Chopin. You blink twice and consider throwing yourself into the sheet music. You pivot. A safe piece. Something universally recognized, impossible to offend, the auditory version of a beige parlor wall. God Save the Queen. Your fingers start the familiar tune. The room breathes with relief. Your aunt lifts her teacup like she's finally forgiven you for being born left-handed. Then your left hand betrays you. It decides it has no interest in monarchy. It rebels. It plays Greensleeves. You do not know how this happens. Your right hand soldiers on, loyal and patriotic. Your left hand mumbles ballads about doomed ladies and unrequited love. Together they create an arrangement that sounds like national pride being wooed by a lute player with commitment issues. Aunt Blanche's teacup clinks hard against the saucer. You correct course. You slam both hands down in a final chord, one so ambiguous it could be mistaken for either the end of a performance or the beginning of a séance. There is a silence, not a pause, silence. Heavy, fragrant, full of imagined futures in which you are disinherited and sent to live in a convent with no piano. Lady Elspeth clears her throat. "Lovely effort," she says, in the tone one uses for dogs attempting to dance. You bow your head, not in gratitude, but in apology to the ghost of Chopin, who is surely weeping into a lace hanky in the afterlife. Your aunt rises. She takes you gently by the elbow, the way one might handle an unexploded cannonball. "Why don't we let someone else try?" she says, steering you from the bench as if you might sit down again and start belting sea shanties. Sebastian, the pallid grandson from earlier, sits in your place. He announces he shall play something inspired by the Italian school. The first note sounds like a spoon falling down a well. The room claps anyway. You take refuge by the ficus. The plant is real but wishes it wasn't. As Sebastian attempts to locate middle C without assistance, a gentleman sidles up beside you. You don't know his name, but his waistcoat is aggressively embroidered and his eyebrows meet in the middle. He says, "I quite like the transition in the middle." You nod, unsure if he's being sincere or subtly inviting you to duel. Unexpected. He adds, "Artful." You blink. You have been accused of being many things today. Graceful, French, moist, but not artful. Not until now. Your aunt appears behind you, like a Victorian wraith. "We will not discuss the piano," she says with a smile that does not reach her eyes. You are escorted to the tea cart. It is not yet tea time, but you are being offered biscuits and social exile. You take both. You sip tepid tea and pretend not to notice the way your aunt occasionally glances at the piano like it's harboring a contagious illness. Sebastian plays on. It is not Chopin. It is not God Save the Queen. It is, possibly, the wheels on the carriage, but no one has the nerve to ask. Your hands are still trembling. You hide them in your lap. You think briefly of what would happen if you stood up right now and played the piece you made at 10 years old, the one that ends in chaos and truth. You imagine Lady Morton fainting into a fern, but instead, you sip. The music drones, and you smile, because despite the wrong notes and traitorous fingers, for one fleeting moment, your hands remembered something all the rules forgot: how to play. You are standing near the hedges, pretending to care about azaleas when courtship begins. You don't mean to begin anything. You are, in fact, doing your best impression of a modestly interested shrub. But your presence has been noted. A gentleman appears. He is wearing a cravat with the confidence of someone who owns a telescope and knows how to make it sound romantic. His name is possibly Archibald, or Reginald, or something equally prone to gout. He breathes in your direction. This, you have been told, is a declaration of interest. A nod would be too forward. A compliment would be social suicide. But a barely perceptible nostril flare, that is passion. That is love on the precipice of scandal. You smile. It is brief, controlled. The kind of smile that says, I acknowledge your existence and may allow you to hand me a scone in public someday, but it is too much. It lingers half a second longer than protocol allows. Somewhere across the garden, a fan snaps shut with the intensity of a guillotine. Miss Lavinia has seen you. She is wearing a hat the size of a respectable side table and eyes you with the expression of a woman who once drowned a kitten just to win at croquet. You have, apparently, made a move. She was already engaged in an unspoken campaign of conquest over Archibald or Reginald, and now you have entered the battlefield. The lawn stiffens. The hydrangeas brace for blood. You retreat to the lemon cakes. It's safer there. You bite one too hard and the icing sticks to your glove. You are trying to dab at it discreetly when the gentleman approaches. He bows. You curtsy. You both say, "What a pleasant afternoon," because no other phrases are permitted until after a chaperone coughs twice. His eyes flicker toward your parasol, which is closed and therefore neutral. An open parasol held in the left hand means you are amused. An open parasol twirled counterclockwise means you are not opposed to the concept of marriage. A closed parasol, however, is the Switzerland of accessories. You glance sideways. Lavinia is watching, holding her parasol aloft like a fencing foil. She opens it with a flourish and tilts it, ever so slightly, to the left. The challenge has been issued. You are not entirely sure what happens next, but it seems to involve a great deal of walking in tightly controlled ovals. You circle the rose trellis with Archibald or Reginald, who quotes a poem about autumn and implies his mother approves of tall women. You nod demurely and say something about harvests. This is courtship. No feelings, no actual facts, just metaphor, embroidery compliments, and faint perspiration. A bee arrives. You swat it. Lavinia gasps. She believes the gesture was a fan flourish, signaling intimacy. Her parasol spins once. Her governess frowns. The gardener flees. The duel is now inevitable. It will happen at dawn, in the garden, with gloved slaps and no witnesses save a morally ambivalent squirrel. But fate has other plans. You are cornered near the orchard by a man you do not recognize. He is older, distinguished, possibly a duke, definitely an uncle. He asks if you enjoyed the overture last evening. You say you did, although you didn't attend. He beams. He says it is rare to find a young lady with such refined taste in overtures she has not heard. You attempt to pivot the conversation toward the weather. He mistakes it for coyness. You laugh nervously. He takes this as consent. He reaches into his coat pocket and produces a locket. Inside is a painting of a pug, and, beside it, a small square of hair that may have once belonged to Queen Charlotte. He hands you the locket. You are now, legally and emotionally, halfway to engaged. You scan the garden for help. Archibald, or Reginald, is speaking with Lavinia. They are both pretending not to look at you. You wave. Lavinia's eyebrow rises. She thinks you are showing off your new suitor, and also the pug. You try to return the locket. The uncle insists. He calls for your aunt. You do not know what you've done, only that the pace of the afternoon has accelerated dangerously. Your aunt arrives, flustered, dragging a tea napkin like a battle flag. The uncle explains that you and he are, if not already betrothed, then certainly spiritually aligned. Your aunt blinks 3 times, then says, "What a charming turn of events," which in her dialect means, "I shall faint in private shortly." You are given more tea. Lavinia is now smiling. Archibald, or Reginald, has vanished entirely, likely retreating into the hedge maze to weep or write sonnets. You sit with the uncle on a wrought iron bench. He tells you about his estate, which includes a folly, 3 falcons, and a lemon tree that produces fruit once every 4 years. He plans to name the next lemon after you. You nod. Your parasol remains closed. Aunt Blanche returns with a smile forged entirely out of duty. She whispers that this match is unexpected but practical, and that you should consider the benefits of an estate with a folly, even if it also comes with a man who refers to trousers as leg bibs. By evening, the engagement is not official, but it is heavily rumored. You walk home beneath a sky tinged with the color of jam that has gone slightly off. Your aunt hums something that might be green sleeves, or might be the sound of quiet resignation. You hold the locket in your gloved hand. The pug stares back. Somewhere in the bushes, Lavinia sharpens her fan. You are upright, barely, wedged into a pew that feels designed more for repentance than spinal support. The sermon stretches on, a slow-moving tide of judgment and vowels, and the vicar has just reached his 3rd warning about the dangers of unchecked gaiety. You are unsure if he means laughter or dancing, or simply the act of being perceived. But you nod in rhythm with the rest of the congregation, and hope no one notices that your vision has gone pleasantly star-speckled. The church is cold in theory, but your corset insists otherwise. Your ribs are negotiating surrender. The morning's tea is somewhere in your lungs. Each breath is a discreet act of rebellion, and every time you shift, the pew creaks in a language only your aunt can hear and judge. Your hat itches. You have lost all feeling in your toes. A man 2 pews ahead coughs, and someone behind you says, "Hush," with enough force to curdle milk. You blink slowly, then the vicar says it. He says, "Ankle." The word hangs in the air like a scandal dipped in marmalade. Someone gasps. Somewhere to your left, an elderly woman fans herself with an order of service. A child giggles and is immediately removed from existence. You faint, not dramatically. You don't have the energy. You simply go away from upright. Your knees politely remove themselves from the situation. Your head leans gently to the left, where it is caught by your cousin Henrietta's shoulder, which is more padded than expected, possibly due to her smuggling a scone in for after the service. There is a collective inhale from the congregation, the way one might inhale upon seeing a dog in church or a bishop sneeze. The vicar pauses mid-sentence. You are now the central miracle. You remain fainted. A few seconds pass, then more, then just enough to be concerning but not so many that anyone is forced to commit to medical intervention. You hear murmurs, distant and delicious. You think someone says your name. Someone else mentions vapors. Someone else wonders aloud whether this has something to do with the cheese at breakfast. Aunt Blanche leans over you like a benevolent storm cloud and hisses, "Don't milk it." But you do, because the floor is cool. The pressure in your chest has lessened, and for the first time in hours, you are not expected to nod at a vicar or balance virtue on your collarbone. The fainting has purchased you a bubble of space where conversation cannot follow. Two footmen carry you to the vestibule, which smells of ancient hymnals and dust from centuries of moral superiority. You are gently laid across a chaise that appears specifically designed for genteel collapses. Someone places a biscuit in your hand. You do not know who. You do not question it. The biscuit is lemon. You nibble it with the practiced elegance of someone who may at any moment slip back into unconsciousness if denied further baked goods. Henrietta fans you with the hymnal. She whispers, "Is it the corset again, or something deeper, like your soul?" You nod in a way that could suggest both, and she seems satisfied. The vicar pokes his head around the doorway and attempts a facial expression that communicates compassion, distance, and mild terror. You give a faint smile. He retreats like a crab at low tide. Word spreads. You hear it ripple outward, gathering speed and embellishment. By the time it reaches the rear pews, you have swooned from spiritual overwhelm. By the time it reaches the churchyard, someone claims you wept before collapsing and quoted the Psalms in Latin. You do not speak Latin. Aunt Blanche returns with a glass of water and a gaze that says if you ever do this again, she will personally lace your corset with barbed wire. You sip and pretend not to enjoy the slight sense of control you now wield. For the rest of the day, no one will ask you to embroider or play piano or respond with appropriate restraint when someone misuses the word melancholy. You are helped to your feet, praised for your bravery, and escorted to the carriage like a victorious invalid. On the ride home, you keep one hand to your temple, just in case anyone needs reminding that you are fragile and deserving of pastries. At home, you are permitted to lie on the fainting couch, the one usually reserved for widows and women betrayed by wallpaper patterns. Henrietta brings you another biscuit. Your aunt brings you a lecture disguised as concern. You nod solemnly and blink more slowly than usual. No one asks you to explain why you fainted, which is fortunate, because you're not entirely sure yourself. Was it the corset, the sermon, the ankle, or maybe it was all of it? The weight of posture and pleasantries, the endless arithmetic of propriety, the constant effort of being seen but never too seen, of hearing your name spoken only in relation to your behavior, your prospects, your posture, your hem length, your ability to hold tea in silence in equal measure. You doze. You dream of a world where ankles roam free, corsets are optional, and fainting is something one does only from laughter. You will not live to see that world. But for 20 sweet minutes, you lived in a space where no one expected anything from you except stillness, and perhaps a second biscuit. You are eating toast, dry, as emotion demands. When the letter arrives, it is sealed in the official gray of moderate tragedy and carried by a footman who looks as if he, too, has recently lost a third cousin twice removed. You open it delicately, mindful not to smudge the ink, which appears to have been applied by someone crying gently onto the page. Your third cousin twice removed has passed. You don't recall her face, though you're fairly certain she once handed you a limp scone at a family gathering and said, "You'll grow into your jaw." She had a fondness for rhubarb and correcting the pronunciation of French words. Her name might have been Millicent or Petunia, possibly both. The morning clock begins. Aunt Blanche emerges from the drapes, where she has been grieving preemptively since Lent, and announces that you will observe the appropriate mourning period. You nod solemnly. You are unclear what the appropriate period is, but you suspect it will last longer than any known form of romantic courtship or dental procedure. It is 18 months. 18 months of black. 18 months of veils, sighing, and avoiding joy like it's contagious. You are not to wear color, laughter, or optimism. You are to glide rather than walk. You are to abstain from frivolity, dancing, and excessive blinking. You are allowed one facial expression, mild bereavement. Your wardrobe transforms overnight. Your gowns are now the exact shade of despair, Your hats have become funereal bird baths, and your gloves whisper melancholy with every movement. Your mirror sulks. Even your petticoats look guilty. You attend no balls. You play no piano. You sit in the corner of the drawing room like an attractive ghost, sipping tea that tastes faintly of moral superiority. There are rules. If someone dies and you are related by blood, you mourn for a full calendar year. If the relation is by marriage, it's 6 months, unless the marriage was short and unimpressive. If it's a second cousin who once lent you a bonnet pin, you still mourn for long enough to ruin the next social season. You attend a luncheon and are scolded for smiling at the bread rolls. You stop smiling at bread. Halfway through month 4, your canary dies. You find it lying in its cage, wings folded like resignation. His name was Captain Pip, and he once pecked your finger when you tried to sing along to his chirps. You are devastated, not just because he is gone, but because now you must enter a sub-mourning within your primary mourning, and no one has written a guidebook for this. You wear a smaller veil. You tell your aunt, who says, "At least he had no scandal." You are not sure if she means the bird or the cousin. You write a eulogy for Captain Pip. It is 5 pages long and references Greek mythology, your own frailty, and the unjust cruelty of fate. You read it aloud to Henrietta, who weeps halfway through and eats an entire biscuit out of grief or boredom, possibly both. You are not allowed to dance, not even a toe wiggle. This is explained to you with a chart. Stage 1 mourning. No music, no dancing, no embroidery involving daisies. Stage 2. Limited conversation, only about the weather and scripture. Stage 3. Minor social re-entry, provided you wear jet jewelry and mention the deceased at least once per hour. Stage 4. Muted colors, like gray or deep mauve, which looks like a bruise that went to finishing school. You attend church and forget to wear gloves. A woman gasps. Someone faints. You are told firmly that even your fingernails must mourn. The vicar gives a sermon on humility and loss. You feel seen. Then he glances at your ankles, and you feel complicated. Your mourning becomes identity. You are no longer miss you. You are the bereaved. You are a fixture in doorways, a shadow at the edge of conversation, the embodiment of dignified suffering. Children salute you with solemn bows. Strangers offer condolences without specifying for whom. You write poetry. It is terrible. You embroider a pillow that says sorrow in capital letters. Henrietta says it is heavy-handed. You embroider another one that simply says, yes. No one questions it. At month 11, you begin to dream in color again. A tulip blooms near the garden path, and you look at it for slightly too long. Your aunt catches you and replaces it with a pot of gray moss. You behave, but your soul begins to itch. You miss yellow. You miss humming. You miss the freedom of walking without sounding like a sigh in human form. By month 16, your morning has blurred into routine. You are not sure if you remember how to laugh. You test it one evening while brushing your hair and emit a sound like a duck trying not to be noticed. You worry it's too soon. Then your aunt begins mourning someone else, a friend's husband's cousin, who died nobly of indigestion, and you are quietly demoted on the grief ladder. You feel relief, then guilt, then relief about the guilt. At month 18, your mourning ends. There is no trumpet, no parade, no ceremony. Your aunt simply nods and says, "You may consider lavender." You wear it like treason. You attend a musicale. You do not faint. You are offered cake and do not cry. A gentleman nods at you during a mazurka, and you do not panic. You even wiggle one toe under the table. Just once, Captain Pip would approve. You are curled in the east-facing armchair, the one that tries to be plush, but mostly feels like judgment. The light is just right, slicing through the parlor in sanctified beams, illuminating the forbidden corners of your soul. And also, your copy of Jane Eyre, which you read like it might self-combust if held too tightly. You've tucked the spine inside a sheet of Psalms, just in case Aunt Blanche walks by and decides to repent on your behalf. You've only reached the part where Mr. Rochester says something cryptic and brooding for the 9th time, and already you can feel your morality unraveling. Then your mother sees it, not the Psalms, the book, the very book. Her eyes narrow, as if spotting a rat in the pantry or a blush in public. You freeze. You attempt to casually turn the page with the subtlety of a condemned woman filing her own gallows. She steps closer. Is that Bronte? You don't answer. You consider fainting. It's worked before. You could clutch your side, say something about spiritual trembling, and collapse into the ficus. But she's already snatched the book from your hands, and now it's dangling in her grip like a live snake with opinions. Jane Eyre is not suitable, she says, with the careful authority of someone who's never read past the dedication. You try to protest, but you're reminded that raising your voice, even by accident, places you in the social tier just above chimney soot and opera singers. She is willful, your mother says, flipping the pages as though they might hiss at her. She has ideas. You are told to reflect. That's code for sit quietly until your thoughts align with something floral and passive. You sit. You do not reflect. You plot. Later that afternoon, you dig beneath the bed linens, past your emergency bonnet and secret stash of contradictory lace, and retrieve your tin of biscuits. Inside, Wuthering Heights, the scandal, the heresy, the sheer unfiltered adrenaline of reading about people who speak without asking permission first. You imagine Catherine walking into your parlor, barefoot, windswept, possibly undead, and speaking plainly. Your aunt would faint before her corset even had the chance. You read in slivers of time, 10 minutes between embroidery and enforced conversation, 7 minutes while pretending to take your smelling salts, 3 glorious minutes behind the screen during piano practice as someone else massacres Handel, but the guilt seeps in. You begin seeing metaphors where none belong. A lace collar reminds you of societal shackles, a teacup, the fragility of female ambition, a biscuit, the fleeting nature of personal autonomy. You narrate your inner thoughts in Victorian prose and start referring to your reflection as the haunted other. You do not stop. Then Henrietta finds the book, not maliciously. She is reaching for a biscuit, as she often does, and emerges victorious with literature instead. She gasps, drops a shortbread, and looks at you as if you've just admitted to kissing a Frenchman in a linen closet. You'll be sent to finishing school, she whispers, and not the good kind, the Presbyterian one. You beg her not to tell. She agrees, but only if she can read it after you. You form a pact. You smuggle chapters between dance cards and hairpins. You discuss plot in hushed tones while threading needles and feigning headaches. You are revolutionaries in crinoline, defenders of Heathcliff and unresolved trauma. But then you're caught. Again, this time, it's your uncle. You'd grown too bold, too relaxed, reading on the terrace like a woman who knows her own thoughts. He coughs with purpose. You leap up so quickly you knock over the flower arrangement and accidentally quote the book aloud. Whatever our souls are made of. You don't finish the sentence. You don't need to. You've already been sentenced. You are told you've lost sight of your purpose, that books written by women, about women, for women, are a dangerous trifecta of vanity, delusion, and poor posture. You're informed that real literature comes with footnotes and doesn't inspire emotional awakenings. You nod. You accept. You weep in an appropriately feminine way. Then, you are grounded, not in the modern sense, where one sulks and stares at walls and perhaps listens to angry symphonies. No, you are grounded in the Victorian way. You are prohibited from walks, from idle chatter, from embroidery that might depict something whimsical. You are handed a Bible, a book of etiquette, and a blank journal in which to practice writing letters to people you're not allowed to send them to. You write anyway. You write of love that screams across moors, of governesses who want more than polite despair, of corsets unhooked not by hands, but by liberation. You hide your pages in the hollow of an old globe, behind Antarctica, because no one in your house respects the southern hemisphere. Weeks pass. You re-emerge. You are calmer, supposedly reformed. You speak less. You quote proverbs. You needlepoint daisies. They are relieved. You are a success. But your thoughts are louder now. They echo with storms and resistance, with dialogue that never got written but lives in the hush between tea and consequence. You no longer fear scandal. You crave it in syllables. You sharpen your wit like embroidery scissors. Your eyes flick toward windows more often. You begin writing your own story. And when your canary cage is finally empty, and Henrietta sighs in boredom, and your mother steps out for her weekly judgment of garden peas, you remove the final biscuit from the tin. Below it is a fresh notebook. Its pages are blank, but not for long. You're seated in the drawing room beneath a painting of a fox hunt that seems more emotionally violent every time you look at it. Opposite you is Miss Lovelace, who smells like lavender and fear, and beside her is a man introduced as Mr. Ellery, from somewhere respectable. Conversation is expected, not encouraged. Expected, like digestion or mourning periods. You are, in theory, a young woman of charm and subtle social skill. You are meant to begin with a remark so artful, so inoffensive, so exquisitely beige that it neither inspires nor threatens. You mention the rain. This is a grave mistake. The weather is currently clear, and has been for some time. In fact, the sky is offensively blue. Your reference to rain is perceived as a subtle critique of someone's lawn, or perhaps a coded insult about umbrella usage. Miss Lovelace stirs faintly, like a lace curtain catching wind. Mr. Ellery blinks, possibly recalibrating your entire moral constitution. Your aunt clears her throat the way a judge might before declaring you unfit for polite society. You pivot. You mention reading. You do not say what. You say, I enjoy novels. The word alone causes Miss Lovelace to go quite still, like prey. Mr. Ellery adjusts his collar. Someone's teacup rattles, and you cannot tell if it's from tremor or judgment. The silence becomes heavy with imagined titles. You know they assume you mean something French, possibly immoral, almost certainly featuring characters who experience feelings. You smile, which only makes it worse. You should have said scripture. You should have said, I enjoy reading aloud the obituaries. You should have said nothing at all. There are rules for conversation, of course, unwritten, but enforced with the enthusiasm of the Queen's Guard. One must never mention anything that implies personal preference. Liking a book, a flower, or the sensation of breathing too deeply suggests independence, and independence is only tolerated in widows and cats. You glance at the tea service and consider asking about Darjeeling, but remember your cousin was once briefly courted by a man who exported tea, and bringing up such a beverage without clarifying your intent might stir up scandal. You try again. You say, how delightful that your niece is engaged. You are proud of this. It is neutral. It is kind. It is about someone else. It is also, somehow, forbidden. Miss Lovelace flinches. Mr. Ellery stares into the void with the intensity of a man who's remembered a past sin. Your aunt coughs twice. You forgot the sacred incantation. You must, when referencing any engagement, append the phrase, "What joy, if it be God's will." Without that, your comment implies either unholy delight or premature assumption, possibly both. You try to correct yourself, but realize anything you say now will be interpreted as sarcasm or witchcraft. You sip your tea. Too loudly. Miss Lovelace looks like she's been slapped with a hymn book. Mr. Ellery asks if you've recently traveled, which is code for, please demonstrate you can still be saved. You say, I visited my cousin last week, forgetting entirely that your cousin lives near the seaside, and seaside locations are synonymous with novelists, salted air, and promiscuous thoughts. You attempt to redeem yourself by noting that the roads were dusty and you stayed indoors, but now you've accidentally implied you suffer from a weak constitution, which is fine in theory, but in practice makes people think of fainting couches and inappropriate ankles. You are failing at conversation. You are becoming dangerous. Someone offers a platter of lemon biscuits. You say, thank you. I adore lemon. This is incorrect. One must never adore anything. That is a language reserved for clergy and occasionally swans. The word hangs there, sticky and undignified. You want to retreat behind the drapes and become fungus. Miss Lovelace remarks on the weather, perfectly this time, noting how the sun obliges us with its gentleness. You nod enthusiastically, trying to match the tone. You say, yes, almost unseasonably warm for September. That's meteorology. That's reasonable. That's also your final mistake. Now you've implied an opinion about climate trends, which means you are either politically vocal or possibly educated, and neither of those belong in your mouth. Your aunt smiles tightly, the way people smile at children who say ghosts live in the cupboard. Mr. Ellery picks up his teacup and sips with the contemplative posture of a man trying to remember if you've ever committed treason. Miss Lovelace feigns interest in embroidery, despite holding her needle upside down. You are gently redirected. The conversation shifts to lace. Not its origins, which might involve French artisans, nor its uses, which might imply undergarments. Simply lace, as a concept. You agree that lace is nice, and white, and available. You do not elaborate. You do not smile. You have survived the round. Later, alone, you replay the interaction in your head and spot at least 11 infractions. The unsanctioned enthusiasm about citrus, the failure to preface an engagement with divine qualifiers, the radical act of saying you like something without permission. You write it all down in your notebook and title the page, Errors I Must Outlive. You practice safe phrases in the mirror. How kind, indeed, it is as God allows. You try them in different tones, matching your eyebrows to your inflection. You attempt a sentence that contains both opinion and safety. How agreeable it is when a room contains both chairs and conversation. You are unsure whether this will provoke or impress. Next week, you will be at another gathering. There will be another fox painting, another teacup orchestra of judgment. You will sit, and someone will ask, have you any thoughts on tulips? And you will freeze, because you do have thoughts on tulips. Passionate ones. But you must bury them beneath something beige. You will say, they are a flower, and nod until someone changes the subject. Your aunt will be proud. Miss Lovelace will not vibrate with moral distress. Mr. Ellery might even smile. And you? You will wonder briefly what might happen if you said what you really meant. Then you'll remember your cousin who once mentioned the word ballet without warning and was sent to live in Cheltenham. So instead, you take another lemon biscuit and say nothing at all. The morning begins innocently enough. There is dew on the hedges, birdsong clattering through the air like over-enthusiastic tambourines, and you, foolishly, believing you can step outside without incident. The garden path is damp. The roses nod approvingly at your restraint, and then, there he island, a gentleman. Not the worst sort of gentleman either. He has clean gloves, shoes without mud, and the air of someone who once read a poem voluntarily. He bows, and before you can feign a headache or point to the clouds and pretend rain, he offers a carriage ride. Just the two of you. You should decline. You know this. Every fiber of your upbringing screams it. But the sun is gentle. The carriage is already waiting, and the thought of sitting indoors embroidering wilted tulips fills you with a despair too large for your corset. So you say yes. A small, foolish yes that seals your social fate more efficiently than any scandal sheet. The carriage smells of leather and restraint. The horse looks complicit. You perch on the edge of the seat, spine so straight it could double as a piano wire. The gentleman smiles, relaxed, as if this is not a declaration of war upon propriety itself. You nod, hands folded tightly in your lap, aware that somewhere, somehow, an ant is clutching her pearls without even knowing why. Conversation is attempted. He mentions the countryside. You murmur agreement, though you are unable to see anything past the curtain of panic closing around your vision. He gestures toward the horizon, but you dare not look, lest someone mistake it for romantic interest in both him and geography. The carriage jolts over a stone, and you nearly topple sideways. For a brief moment, your sleeve brushes his coat. The physical contact echoes like cannon fire across your conscience. You have, in essence, just performed a marriage ritual. By the time the horse pulls you past the vicarage, you feel the stairs. Curtains twitch with surgical precision. A vicar's wife clutches her watering can like a witness weapon. Children scatter, already rehearsing rhymes about your downfall. You imagine the words whispered at tea. Alone, carriage. Her mother must be distraught. The news will spread by supper. By morning, it will be legend. The gentleman, oblivious, comments on the architecture of the vicarage. You nod faintly, already writing your obituary in your mind. Here lies a young woman, undone by a horse ride and a momentary lapse in judgment. May God forgive her, for the vicar's wife certainly will not. When the ride ends, you descend with the dignity of a queen stepping off the scaffold. You thank him with precisely the right amount of gratitude, enough to avoid insult, not enough to signal desire. He bows again, cheerful, untouched by the doom he has unwittingly conspired in. You watch the carriage roll away, carrying both him and your reputation into the distance. Back inside, Aunt Blanche is waiting. Of course she island. She has already heard. Perhaps she was born knowing. She does not speak at first. She simply looks at you with the silence of 100 disappointed ancestors. Then she sighs, long and heavy, and says, "Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself," which, in her dialect, translates to, "Pack your things, you may as well move to France." Henrietta corners you in the hall, wide-eyed and trembling with delight. "You're ruined," she whispers, as if announcing a surprise party. She lists the consequences with relish. Invitations rescinded, gossip pamphlets drafted, a life of embroidery and regret. You protest weakly, insisting it was nothing but a ride, a mere moment of equestrian convenience. She shakes her head, pitying. You may as well have danced barefoot on the communion table. By evening, the household hums with scandal. Servants whisper in the pantry. Your uncle pretends to read the paper, but clears his throat with judgment every 2 minutes. Even the family cat avoids your lap, unwilling to risk association. Supper is a strained affair, punctuated by Aunt Blanche's repeated inquiries about whether the chicken tastes respectable. You chew in silence, wondering if disgrace has a flavor. The next day, evidence of your crime multiplies. A neighbor delivers a basket of apples, heavy with insinuation. The vicar's wife pays a casual call, during which she praises Henrietta's composure and never once looks at you. Later, you overhear 2 maids arguing over whether your fall from grace will be fast or slow, and whether you will at least receive good cake at your inevitable farewell gathering. You retreat to your room. You pace. You rehearse speeches of defense that no one will ever allow you to deliver. You consider fainting preemptively, though fainting has begun to lose its currency in the household. At last you collapse onto your bed, veil of doom firmly in place, and stare at the ceiling. What was it, truly? A ride, a horse, a seat, a gentleman, the countryside passing by like a backdrop you weren't allowed to notice. And yet, it feels monumental, as if you stepped not into a carriage but into history, destined to be remembered as the girl who once sat too close to a man while in motion. You wonder if future generations will laugh. They probably will, but not kindly. At breakfast, your aunt makes it clear, this is not to happen again. She outlines new rules. You are not to be alone with any man, carriage or otherwise, unless he is your father, your brother, or the bishop's nephew who has a lazy eye and therefore doesn't count. You nod, penitent, buttering your bread, in silence. Somewhere, in the corner of the room, Henrietta suppresses a giggle, but even as you shrink into propriety once more, a rebellious thought hums beneath your corset. The ride was nice, not thrilling, not romantic, but free. For half an hour, you were not mourning or sipping tea or calculating the approved angle of a smile. You were simply moving forward, horse hooves pounding, wind in your hat ribbons, with no audience but the hedges. It felt, in some small way, like being alive. And if that is ruin, you think, then ruin tastes suspiciously like freedom. The parlor smells faintly of lavender, scorched wool, and quiet malice. Chairs have been arranged in a circle, as though you are about to summon spirits. But no, it is worse. You are at a sewing circle. A dozen women sit with hoops and needles, heads bent in holy concentration, lips pursed as though the fate of the empire depends on a French knot. In a way, it does. Embroidery is virtue manifested in thread, and your needlework will be examined as if it were scripture. You settle into your chair, clutching your hoop, as if it were a weapon you don't quite know how to wield. The first prick comes quickly. You stab your thumb before the needle even meets fabric. A tiny bead of blood blooms like scandal itself. You hide your hand in your lap, pressing your kerchief to it, praying no one notices. Unfortunately, Lavinia notices everything. She is already staring at you with the glazed delight of a woman who's found fault in another and intends to drink it like wine. "Oh dear," she says sweetly. "Are you unaccustomed to sewing? How unfortunate." You mutter something about slippery thread. The other ladies hum in that collective way women do when they've scented gossip but haven't yet agreed upon its flavor. Around the circle, neat little roses and ivy leaves sprout on linen like miniature gardens. Your own square of fabric looks like it's been mauled by moths with artistic ambition. You try a daisy. It becomes a blot. You attempt a leaf. It turns into something that resembles a diseased insect. Lavinia tilts her head. Such bold stitches. They remind me of the work one sometimes sees from tradespeople. She smiles, but it is not a smile. It is a polite dagger, slipped between your ribs and twisted until you hear your ancestors screaming. You consider stabbing her in return, perhaps just lightly in the sleeve, but that would only confirm everyone's suspicion that you belong more in a butcher's shop than a drawing room. The woman beside you, Mrs. Harcourt, offers a sympathetic glance, but she is too busy embroidering a scene so intricate it could be mistaken for a portrait of the Queen. You lean closer to hide your shame and prick yourself again, this time drawing enough blood that you wonder if you should faint for dramatic effect. No one notices. Lavinia is telling a story about her cousin, who once embroidered a hymn so perfectly the vicar cried and asked for forgiveness from the fabric itself. Everyone sighs appreciatively. You imagine tearing your own square into confetti and declaring modern art. The tea tray arrives, but it offers no salvation. You sip too quickly, scald your tongue, and when you place your cup back on the saucer, it clinks too loudly. Conversation falters. All eyes flick to you, the barbarian who makes noise with porcelain. You smile weakly, trying to appear composed, but the effect is closer to someone suppressing indigestion. Lavinia dabs her lips and says, "It's quite all right. Not everyone is meant for refinement." You imagine her tripping over her own petticoat and falling face first into the coal scuttle. This fantasy sustains you for several minutes as you wrestle with another stitch that refuses to obey. You attempt to copy Henrietta, who is producing passable daisies, but your thread knots itself in a sulk and creates a lump that looks vaguely like a rat. Lavinia peers over, feigns surprise, and says, "How creative. A rustic motif. You bite your tongue. Hard." The circle continues its hum of quiet murder. Gossip drips into the air as steadily as tea. Mrs. Harcourt whispers that the vicar's new sermon will be about humility. Miss Jameson wonders aloud whether humility can be embroidered. Lavinia interrupts to say she would know, since her family's motto is virtus in stamine, virtue in stitches. You suspect she invented this motto 5 minutes ago. The others murmur in admiration. You stab your fabric with unnecessary force, producing a line so jagged it looks like lightning striking a field of despair. When the hostess finally praises the progress, each hoop is passed around for admiration. Roses, lilies, scripture verses twined in ivy. Then yours. A silence descends, deep and glacial. The square passes from hand to hand. No one comments. They nod politely, as one does at funerals. Then it reaches Lavinia. She gazes at it for a long, theatrical moment, then says, "How very modern." The word hangs like a guillotine blade. Modern is code for tasteless. Modern is code for immoral. Modern is code for French. You feel the circle tighten around you, a noose of lace and quiet cruelty. You want to rise, to declare that embroidery is not the measure of a soul, that thread and virtue are not interchangeable, but instead you smile, demur, and prick your thumb again, blood seeping into the ruin of your stitches like punctuation. When the circle ends, you pack your hoop away, vowing to burn it later. Henrietta pats your arm in consolation, but she is smirking, and you know she will mention this at supper. Lavinia kisses the air near your cheek and says, "Do come again. We so enjoy your effort." You curtsy, muttering thanks, and retreat before you can be asked to display your creation on the mantel, where it would sit like a curse. At home, you collapse onto the fainting couch, hoop in hand. You stare at the fabric, a battlefield of thread and resentment, and almost laugh. Almost. Then you imagine Lavinia's perfect roses catching fire in a candle flame, and you laugh properly, if only for a moment. Your stitches may be uneven, but at least they're yours. And perhaps, one day, someone will look at them and say, "Yes, that's what honesty looks like in thread." Until then, you keep your needle sharp, not for embroidery, but for survival. Sunday morning arrives with the punctual misery of bells that never asked whether anyone actually wanted to be summoned. You are dressed, of course, in what is meant to be your finest. A dress that whispers modesty but screams starch. Gloves that pinch as if punishing you for invisible crimes. And the bonnet. Always the bonnet. You choose the blue one, trimmed in ribbons that seem cheerful in candlelight but, in the merciless daylight, border on revolutionary. It is a risk, you know this, but the beige bonnet makes you look like damp porridge, and you are not prepared to be porridge in public. The church fills slowly, as though dignity requires arriving 3 minutes after you're expected. You slide into your pew, careful not to rustle your skirts, careful not to breathe too audibly. The air is thick with perfume, mothballs, and judgment. You feel the eyes on you before the hymn book even opens. Then it happens. A hiss of sound from 3 pews back. A whisper carried with surgical precision, sharpened into a dart. Questionable morals. Your ears burn. Your aunt stiffens beside you, her fan trembling like an outraged dove. Henrietta leans forward with a gleam in her eyes, hungry for scandal. You stare straight ahead, as though you are deeply absorbed in contemplating the wood grain of the pew. But the word lingers. Morals. As if a strip of blue ribbon has rewritten your entire soul. The vicar drones on about charity and restraint, but you know the true sermon is happening behind you. Every tilt of a hat, every twitch of a veil, every murmur passed from glove to glove. You are suddenly the subject of an invisible trial, judged by a jury of bonnets that range from meek beige to aggressive purple. When the collection plate comes, you place your coin with exaggerated delicacy, as though piety can be bought in half pennies. It does not matter. The blue remains, defiant against a sea of muted tones. By the final hymn, you can feel the gossip fermenting, ready to be decanted over supper tables across the parish. At home, Aunt Blanche wastes no time. She informs you, with the gravitas of a general announcing defeat, that the blue must go. You protest weakly, arguing that it is simply a bonnet, a piece of fabric meant to shield one's head from sun and bird droppings. She fixes you with a stare that suggests you've personally invited Satan to tea. A bonnet, she says, is not fabric. It is reputation. You nod, chastened, as if she has delivered eternal truth. The next week, you submit. You wear the beige. You look like you've been sculpted from despair. You walk into church, demure, unthreatening, bland as boiled cabbage. You expect, at last, safety. But no, not safety. Pity. Poor dear, someone whispers. Still mourning. You are not mourning. Unless one counts mourning your own will to live. Yet your beige bonnet declares otherwise, painting you as a figure of sorrow too fragile for laughter, too somber for merriment. A woman pats your arm sympathetically as she passes. A child offers you a sticky, sweet, the universal currency of comfort. The vicar looks at you with such grave tenderness, you half expect him to deliver a psalm directly to your lap. You are trapped. Blue is too bold. Beige is too sad. White is too bridal. Black too tragic. Green too Irish. And red. Red is not even worth considering unless you are actively auditioning for perdition. Each color carries its own accusation, each trim its own insinuation. Even ribbons must be measured for moral weight. Too stiff, and you are cold-hearted. Too floppy, and you are weak-willed. Too symmetrical, and you are vain. Too asymmetrical, and you are French. You begin to envy the men whose hats are allowed to be simply hats. Stiff, dull, interchangeable. No one whispers questionable morals because of the angle of a brim. No one accuses them of secret mourning if their hat is slightly faded. You wonder what it feels like to walk into a church without your headwear announcing a scandal before you've even sat down. By the third Sunday, you are exhausted. You experiment with a bonnet trimmed in gray, neutral, balanced, invisible. It seems safe. It seems for a moment to pass unnoticed. You dare to hope, then misses. Harcourt leans across the pew, squints at you, and whispers, "How curious, gray at your age. Are you signaling spinsterhood early?" You nearly choke on the hymn book. There is no winning, not in this game. You are a pawn in a millinery battlefield, sacrificed weekly to the whims of gossip and fabric. Your bonnet is never merely your bonnet. It is always a declaration, a confession, a surrender. And yet, you keep wearing them. You have no choice. Without a bonnet, you would be indecent, bareheaded, a creature of chaos and exposed hair. The shame of it would send Aunt Blanche to her grave and possibly resurrect her again for one final scolding. So you compromise. You wear the beige bonnet, but you line the inside with blue ribbon where no one can see. A secret rebellion, a private streak of color hidden against your hair. No one whispers about it. No one condemns it. It belongs to you alone. And when the vicar speaks of inner virtue, you smile faintly, knowing that beneath the beige, beneath the pity, beneath the endless hierarchy of hats, you carry your own scandal tucked just above your ear. You are summoned at dawn, not with words but with the sound of the coal scuttle being emptied outside your door. It is the Victorian equivalent of a trumpet blast, announcing that today you will suffer. Aunt Blanche informs you with a crispness that could slice bread. You are to oversee the household management, a trial by parlor, pantry, and patience. You smile weakly, because smiling is cheaper than fainting, and nod. The first task, the tea inventory. You approach the tea chest like a condemned prisoner. Inside are tins upon tins, labeled with cryptic scrawls in faded ink. Darjeeling, Ceylon, Assam, something called gunpowder, which you suspect might be both beverage and political statement. You attempt to count them. You lose track somewhere between tin 12 and tin 17 when Henrietta wanders by and asks if you've ever considered that tea leaves are really just steeped corpses. You banish her from the room before you start sobbing into the Assam. You regroup. You tally. You cry anyway. Then comes the parlor maid, timid, holding a duster like a reluctant sword. You must oversee her dusting of the antimacassars. You didn't know antimacassars were things until this morning, and now you are apparently their guardian angel. Lace squares sit draped over chairs like fragile doilied ghosts, and the maid flicks at them so gently you suspect the dust is multiplying rather than fleeing. You lean forward, attempting to correct her angle, and knock one to the floor. It folds in on itself like a collapsed star. You try to restore it, but now it hangs crooked, accusing. The maid looks at you, as though you've destroyed civilization. Coal is next. You count the lumps, individually, by hand. There are hundreds, and they all look alike, blackened little reminders that heat requires suffering. You sneeze 5 times. You lose count. You start again. By lump 39, your eyes water. By lump 72, you are praying for divine intervention. By lump 96, you have the unsettling realization that coal looks faintly like antimacassars if you squint long enough. You write down a sufficient amount in the ledger and pray no one checks. The asparagus forks come after. You line them on the dining table like tiny silver soldiers. Each one must gleam, though no one in the household has eaten asparagus since the coronation of someone you can't recall. You polish anyway. The forks resist, tarnish clinging like sin. You scrub until you see your distorted reflection staring back, wild-eyed, bonnet askew, muttering about vegetables. Henrietta walks in again, takes one look, and whispers, "Possessed." You throw a fork at her. It misses. By now, your head aches. Your fingers cramp. You have not blinked in 7 hours. You fear that if you do, a coal lump will miscount itself, or an antimacassar will leap from its chair and fling itself into disgrace. Your aunt glides in periodically, issuing commands in the tone of a monarch. "Have you accounted for the candles?" she asks. You hadn't, but now you must. There are 32 in the drawer, except 2 are broken, and one smells suspiciously of tallow rather than beeswax. You record this as 31.5, though you know such precision will never save you. At noon, you attempt to eat, but management allows no food. You nibble a crust in secret and nearly choke when Lavinia visits unannounced to observe. She wanders the parlor, tapping antimacassars with a gloved finger, remarking, "How quaint." Your approach to lace symmetry. You imagine throwing her into the coal scuttle, but instead, you smile until your jaw aches. She leaves satisfied, which is worse than if she had criticized. The day crawls forward, one inventory at a time. The linen cupboard, the teaspoons, the state of the doormat, which you are informed reflects the soul of the household. You beat it with a broom until it resembles woven exhaustion. You nearly collapse onto it, but propriety demands upright posture, so you stagger back to the tea chest and count again, just in case the tins have multiplied in rebellion. By dusk, you are trembling. The household ledger sits before you, covered in your cramped, uneven script. Tea, sufficient. Coal, adequate. Antimacassars, unpredictable. Asparagus forks, gleaming. Candles, fragmented. Doormat, scolded. You fear none of this will please Aunt Blanche. She inspects your notes, purses her lips, and finally says, "Passable." The word lands like salvation. Passable, not excellent, not exemplary, but enough to prevent your immediate disinheritance. You sag against the wall. Henrietta brings you water, which you nearly weep into. Even the maid softens, patting your shoulder with her dust cloth, as though you've survived a minor war. And perhaps you have. As you collapse onto your bed, half blind with fatigue, you realize that household management is not about tea or coal or forks. It is about control, about proving that you can bend the world into order even as it resists. It is torture disguised as duty. It is endurance measured in antimacassars. You close your eyes. The ledger lies beside you, heavy with dust and sweat. In the silence, you hear the coal shifting in its bin, the forks gleaming faintly in the dark, the antimacassars breathing their crooked, ghostly breaths. Tomorrow, you suspect, they will demand to be counted again. You weep quietly into your pillow, and then, because you have no choice, you sleep. The water is tepid at best, and possibly offended at being summoned. You stand beside the tin tub in your room, staring at it as though it might lunge. The maid has filled it halfway with water that smells faintly of coal smoke and regret. Steam wafts upward in the faintest of sighs, as if the bath itself knows it will be spoken of only in whispers, if at all. You are allowed one bath this month. One. You must make it count, though the notion of counting anything in relation to this experience feels absurd. You undress with the solemnity of a prisoner surrendering her possessions. Each layer peels away like guilt. The corset, the petticoats, the camise, until you are left in the scandalous condition of simply existing without fabric. You shiver, not from cold, but from the overwhelming sense that you are now morally suspect. You step into the tub, the water lukewarm and judgmental, and lower yourself carefully, as though propriety itself might be hiding at the bottom to snap at your ankles. The sensation is fine, not luxurious, not liberating, just damp. You sit rigidly, knees drawn, attempting to look dignified in a situation where dignity is impossible. The maid is required to remain in the corner, because apparently bathing alone is unthinkable. But she must also not look at you, because bathing while observed is also unthinkable. She manages this by staring at the ceiling with the dedication of a saint and humming "God Save the Queen" in a tone that suggests she, too, would rather be anywhere else. You attempt to scrub. The soap is small, harsh, and smells faintly of carbolic. You rub at your arm until it squeaks, then stop, uncertain whether squeaking is a sign of cleanliness or overzealousness. You rinse quickly, but the water now looks murky, as though tattling on your efforts. You scoop some over your shoulders and try to look purposeful, though you know no one is grading you, except society, always society. When you finish, you rise carefully, dripping modesty onto the floorboards. The maid rushes forward with a towel that could cover a sparrow at best. You clutch it around yourself, shuffling back into layers of linen and wool as though repenting for the crime of having skin. By the time you are dressed, the entire experience has lasted perhaps 15 minutes, yet it feels like you've lived a lifetime of shame. You vow not to mention it aloud. And yet, later that afternoon, in a moment of weakness, you confess during tea. "I bathed this morning," you say casually, as if it is no different from remarking on the weather. The reaction is catastrophic. Mrs. Harcourt's teacup slips, clattering onto its saucer with the sound of imminent scandal. Miss Jameson gasps audibly, hand to throat, as though you've just confessed to arson. Henrietta chokes on her biscuit. Aunt Blanche blinks once, very slowly, then fixes you with a look reserved for thieves and women who read French novels. There is silence. Then Mrs. Harcourt leans forward, whispering, "You bathed?" The word is elongated, weighted, pronounced as if it were indecent. You nod weakly, already regretting your honesty. They question you, relentless. How long did it last? What exactly did you wash? Did you use a cloth? Was there soap? Was the maid present? Did the maid look? You stumble through half answers, realizing with mounting horror that the etiquette is not simply vague, it is contradictory. Baths are necessary, but not to be mentioned. They are private, but never unsupervised. They are cleansing, but indulgent. A woman who bathes too often is vain. A woman who bathes too rarely is barbaric. There is no winning. Someone mutters that in France, women bathe daily. The room shudders. Someone else insists that a proper Englishwoman requires only a sponge and a sense of restraint. Henrietta asks if you noticed any unusual warmth in the water, suggesting, perhaps, that you have been infected by modernity. Aunt Blanche interrupts before you can respond, declaring that this subject is distasteful. The tea resumes, strained and brittle. You sit quietly, sipping, as though the words haven't already been carved into the family narrative. That evening, whispers ripple through the house. The servants glance at you with barely concealed curiosity. The butler coughs pointedly as you pass. Henrietta sings a song in the hall about ladies and their tubs, which you vow to retaliate against when the time is right. You lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if your brief flirtation with hygiene will forever mark you as dangerous. The next morning, you overhear Lavinia at the market, telling Mrs. Harcourt that you bathe with enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, as though you sang hymns to the soap, as though you splashed about like a child in a pond. The phrase spreads faster than a fire in a lace factory. By week's end, the vicar pointedly reminds the congregation that moderation is a virtue in all things, including cleanliness. You avoid his gaze. You vow never to speak of bathing again. Not until the next month, when duty demands another ritual dunking. You will endure it quietly, modestly, shamefully. You will allow the maid to stare at the ceiling. You will scrub without squeaking, and you will step out of the tub determined to carry your secret like contraband. And if anyone asks, you will say only that you feel refreshed. Then you will cough loudly to erase the word and change the subject to something safer, like antimacassars, or the weather, or the coal count, anything but water. The evening begins with a cough. Not just any cough, but the kind of cough that signals intent. You are sitting stiffly in the parlor, bonnet discarded for once, pretending to read a book you have no chance of following because your aunt's eyes are fixed on you like an executioner's blade. Across from you sits a man of acceptable means and questionable hairline. He clears his throat again, and Aunt Blanche's fan flutters in approval. This is it. This is the horror. He does not speak directly to you. That would be improper. Instead, he addresses your father, who has been bribed into attendance with promises of a new billiards table. "Sir," he begins, fumbling with his gloves, "I would like to inquire about her." He nods vaguely in your direction, as if you are an umbrella propped in the corner rather than a person with thoughts, or at least the faint outline of them. Your father grunts. The man continues. She seems to read? You are unsure whether this is a compliment or an accusation. Aunt Blanche jumps in before you can respond. She reads lightly, she says, as though that is a manageable sin. The proposal progresses. He mentions cows. Specifically, the cow he might be willing to offer in addition to a modest dowry. Your father looks intrigued, which is not flattering. Aunt Blanche beams as if the cow itself has already been milked into Social Security. You wonder briefly if this means your value is equivalent to livestock. You decide not to dwell. Then comes the question, asked not to you but into the general air of the parlor. Does she enjoy country walks? The room stills. You know the correct answer is yes. Not too enthusiastic, not too hesitant. You nod, the tiniest dip of your head, and the man looks triumphant, as though you've just signed a legal document, which, in a sense, you have. Congratulations. You are now engaged. The realization dawns slowly, like a storm cloud creeping over the horizon. You are to be married. To a man whose cough has more character than his conversation. To to a life that promises endless country walks, livestock negotiations, and parlor evenings filled with tepid small talk. You try to smile. It looks more like indigestion. Tea is brought in, because tea must punctuate every major moment of existence. You hold your cup too tightly, and it rattles against the saucer, betraying your nerves. The man attempts a joke about teapots, which lands with the grace of a collapsing antimacassar. Your aunt laughs too loudly, desperate to smooth the air. You sip, scald your tongue, and wonder if fainting would end the evening. The details begin to unravel around you, where the wedding might be held, what fabrics might be suitable, who will be offended if not invited, and who will be offended if they are. Your life is dissected and rearranged on the table between plates of seed cake. You are no longer you. You are a bride, a future wife, a potential mother, a creature of ribbons and duty. Later, alone in your room, you stare at the ceiling, trying to imagine what it means. Will you share a bed with this man who coughs as though clearing a century from his lungs? Will he expect you to embroider his handkerchiefs, to smile at his jokes, to accompany him on endless strolls past hedges you will grow to despise? Will you be permitted to keep your books, your secret scraps of writing tucked in biscuit tins? You do not know. That is the terror, and yet there is also the possibility that it will not be dreadful. Perhaps he will be kind. Perhaps he will forget you read more than lightly. Perhaps he will allow you to walk quickly, even occasionally alone. Perhaps he will not notice when you hide novels under the cushions. It is a fragile hope, and you cling to it, because without it, you would have nothing but cows and coughs to look forward to. The next morning, word has spread. Lavinia calls, smug as a cat, to remark that your fiancé seems steady. Henrietta grins wickedly, whispering questions about how many cows were offered, whether you think he will die early, whether you will inherit anything more exciting than spoons. Aunt Blanche is incandescent with pride, floating through the house, as though she arranged the entire affair by sheer force of will. You smile, nod, thank, and sip. All the while, the truth pounds in your head. Your life is over. Or it is just beginning. Hard to tell. You pour yourself another cup of tea, because if there is one certainty in all of this, it is that tea will carry you through. And you pray silently, fervently, that when the wedding comes, no one whispers about the color of your bonnet. The candle guttering on your nightstand is the only honest thing left in the room. It burns as it pleases, drips where it wants, and collapses in its own time. You envy it. You are not allowed such freedom. You peel away the gloves, tugging them from your fingers as though removing a second skin that has judged you all day. Your hands are pale and slightly wrinkled from the heat and sweat, and for a moment you feel scandalously naked just looking at them. You tuck them under the coverlet, as if hiding them from some celestial observer who might write in the great ledger of propriety. Hands, indecently bare. The hairpins come next. They scatter across the dressing table like tiny iron insects, clattering against the wood with each release. You pull them out one by one, each tug loosening not just your hair but the day itself, as though every pin contained a memory you would rather forget. The whispered insult about your bonnet, the coal dust that refused to be counted, the teacup that shook when you admitted to bathing. You lay them in a crooked line, small trophies of endurance. And then, the corset, the cage. You undo the laces, struggling as your ribs sigh in muted relief. It slips away, a serpent shed at last, leaving you soft, mortal, and entirely too human. You inhale fully for the first time in hours, and the sound of your lungs expanding feels almost indecent. You sit there, corset pooled on the floor like an abandoned argument, and wonder how it is possible that something so hateful can also be something you are expected to long for tomorrow. You sigh, softly, cautiously. The sound escapes before you can swallow it, and you freeze, glancing toward the door. No one has heard, but the act itself feels dangerous. Sighing too loudly suggests discontent. Discontent suggests rebellion. Rebellion suggests France. You slip beneath the heavy quilts and pull them up to your chin, swaddling yourself in sanctioned silence. The room is dark now, but your mind refuses to follow. It replays the day with merciless detail, each moment a potential crime. Did you curtsy too deeply to the vicar's niece, implying mockery? Did you sip your tea too quietly, suggesting arrogance? Was the angle of your fan at supper accidentally flirtatious? You shift under the covers, haunted by the possibility that your very posture at the dinner table condemned you to whispers that will echo through parlors for months. Sleep does not come willingly. It circles the edges of your room like a wary guest, reluctant to enter lest it be accused of impropriety. When it finally arrives, it does so like a thief, quiet and precise, slipping past the defenses of etiquette. It does not knock, it does not curtsy, it simply takes hold of you, and yet even in dreams you are not free. You dream of walking too quickly, of gloves turned inside out, of antimacassars folding themselves into accusatory shapes. You dream of country walks you never agreed to, of veils of mourning that descend without warning, of bonnets that whisper your sins as you pass through pews. You dream of a parlor filled with every rule you have broken, each one perched in a chair, wagging its lace-covered finger at you. You wake, heart pounding, sweat damp on your brow, though not enough to justify another bath. The candle has died, leaving behind a curl of smoke that smells faintly of freedom. You close your eyes again, determined to force yourself back into sleep before morning comes, before gloves and corsets and bonnets reclaim you. You lie very still, breathing carefully, as though even in the privacy of your bed, the world might be listening. And perhaps at Island. After all, etiquette is not merely a set of rules. It is a shadow. It follows you into the parlor, the church, the garden, the bath, and now into the bed itself. You pull the quilt tighter around your shoulders. You tell yourself tomorrow you will do better, though you already know you will fail. You always fail. Everyone does. That is the point. At last, exhaustion outweighs fear. Sleep descends again, light-footed, a burglar carrying no lantern. It tucks you in without asking permission, and you surrender, not gracefully, but completely. For once, you do not dream, or if you do not remember, which is its own kind of rebellion.